18th, 2018. We've got 2018 board priorities, smoking regulations, and committee term limits on the agenda. We're going to start with board priorities. And as we do in other retreats, this is just generally a board discussion. The audience is welcome to listen. If we have time for public comment towards the end, we'll allow that. Generally, we haven't in past retreats, but they're all just kind of take it step by step. So I want to start with, so we can get started with the board priorities.
Yeah, thanks to Mark. He grouped them for us based on the general areas that they covered from the feedback we got from board members. I guess we maybe start with, is there anything on here that's, anything not listed that somebody would like to add?
Okay. We can either start from the top or work our way down to miscellaneous, or start anywhere, really.
And last year we'd come up with a top 4, and I think that might be useful for, I mean, as an end result of this list to do the same thing, and that would be an interesting comparison to last year.
Yeah.
And also just see how things align to last year and how things may have changed from last year.
The top 4 last year were Recreation Center Indoor Civic Space, Downtown Superior Plaza, Commercial Development and Main Street Completion, Transportation Issues, and Parks 1 and 2 in Downtown Superior.
I'm a little perplexed though. I was last year and I'm perplexed now. Certain things I think go with the territory.
Mm-hmm.
For example, transportation issues. That should always be a priority in my opinion, but there are a lot of things that should always be priority. For example, road projects, wastewater, effective snow removal, all of that to me goes with the job. So when I look at goals, I'm almost looking at goals that go beyond the ordinary business of running and managing a town.
Yep.
So transportation issues, I didn't see it in this list for this year, but it is a priority that needs to always be addressed. So when you take it off, it doesn't mean it's, let's say, I don't say to my top 4, I'm not saying it's not the same old priority it's always been and should always be. It's just I think it almost shouldn't have been there last year because it is always a priority.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
We took some significant steps on trial projects and things that we did during
But I think that
17.
should always be the case. I think transportation and safety, or traffic and safety, should always be a priority. And I am glad it's finally, the Transportation and Safety Committee is finally being promoted and managed in an effective manner, which took a lot of years to get there. But I want that to always happen. So I am not going to say here transportation and traffic should be a priority, because I'm looking at it from this broader context of what things that we don't normally do, do we want to do in 2018. But that's my opinion.
I think with the transportation issues, though, when we got on the board, there were definitely a bunch of things in the hopper in terms of needs that needed to be addressed. And I think the Transportation Safety Committee has been really effective this year in meeting more often, having actually well-attended meetings, and then bringing issues to the board, which then the board has taken action on.
Yeah.
So, to me, it's not necessarily, I agree with you that it is certainly a very important topic always, right? There's always going to be traffic issues that need to be addressed. I think the difference is a year ago, there were a number of issues that needed attention immediately. And now I think we are addressing those issues, I think, sufficiently that now, I'd rather focus our attention on, discrete projects and discrete topics that we want to focus our energy on. I don't see a dire need right now to do anything differently than we're doing right now in terms of transportation issues, because I think we're dealing with it
Okay,
appropriately.
well-
But I mean, I still think,
Yeah.
in terms of town board goals, it's an issue. I just think it's working right now.
Right.
So let's focus our attention on the things that need.
Right, but I don't want us to, for example, Coal Creek Drive issues, it's in progress.
Yeah.
We don't know if it's working, or we're going to stay with it or not.
Right.
But we will, even if that is not a top four, we will see that to its end.
Mhm.
And same way with Weldona. We will continue to assess that. 88, we will continue, and we will continue to add others. For example,
We're doing Castle Peak right now.
and there's this thing of a possible roundabout at Indiana and McCaslin, stuff like that. To me, just because I don't want to hear in a later meeting, well, that wasn't the priority this year regarding transportation, is I guess what I'm saying, because I think it's always a priority and it's always relevant to take up an emerging issue and see the standing issues through.
Yeah.
Okay, so,
But the only other thing that I do think Jefferson Parkway and our reaction or non-reaction to it, that's a transportation issue. And at least, it's transportation. So I just don't want Jefferson Parkway to disappear as something we might want to be thinking about if we say we don't have any transportation
yeah, good thinking,
issues. So-
because obviously,
That would
that
be
is a
mine.
whole issue in and of itself
Yeah.
that I think does meet the town board goals standard, because it is such a massive issue, and Transportation Safety Committee is not set up to deal with that one.
Okay, that's all.
Okay.
In terms of headings, we probably should have a transportation heading and put Jefferson Parkway under it, to your point.
Yes.
Because I think it's not either of the other two.
It
And-
transcends just transportation. But
Okay, so in terms of creating our list, or just refining our list, let's do that. Okay. Other comments?
I'll just, just one thought on the Jefferson Parkway issue. So the Transportation, Safety Committee, we've got Chris on the TSC, and he's with Sandy working on Rocky Flats issues.
But Chris isn't working on
is not
Jefferson
working on
Parkway. He
Jefferson.
has
So-
never worked on Jefferson Parkway.
Right, so-
But he served on the board while it's been a topic for 8 years, whatever, so.
So, to the extent that there's, Sandy, you've been doing a lot for Jefferson Parkway. Just want to make sure that it's not being thrust on, Transportation Safety Committee, inappropriately or unintentionally.
No, I don't.
We obviously don't have the attention
I
to it
think
as
it
you.
transcends that.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah,
that's
I don't
fine.
think that's your position.
Good.
Unless you really want to do it. I think it's bigger than that.
Yeah.
Right.
So, Clint, what did you just say about proceeding?
I said, in terms of kind of refining Mark's list, that he
Of the list?
grouped a couple of things under these different categories. I think a category that is titled transportation and then a sub-item would be Jefferson Parkway, but that is different than
Yeah,
the
TSC.
TSC things. I think we all agree on that.
It seems to me that the 2018 priorities still fit into the 2017 priorities, top 4 priorities. We may define our focus a little bit differently, but we're still talking about recreation center and indoor civic space.
And Parks 1 and 2.
And we're still talking about Parks 1 and 2 and how we're going to fund those and pay for those and who's going to pay for them and when they're going to be done, because we're trying to move that down the road as fast as we can. And we're still talking about development in downtown Superior. Now, here it says downtown Superior Plaza, but we're basically, okay, so we're basically now talking about Main Street more and not the plaza as much, right?
Yeah.
And also, I would always throw in the marketplace, you know, ongoing development of the commercial areas. What can we do to enhance development on Main Street and in Marketplace, rather than Superior Plaza? And then transportation issues, if you want to leave that in there and still talk about transportation issues, or if you want to replace that with something else, what would it be? You know, of these, because I think that we have the same top priorities for 2018. We just might focus our attention a little bit differently.
I would agree. I think for me personally, it's appropriate to take transportation off and say put broadband on. I mean, that's me, but.
Or
that's-
something
and that's
else,
what-
yeah, something
yes,
from that
something
list,
else,
yeah.
yes. I think that's what I would like us to get to is an updated top four.
I don't think we should also be fixated on 4.
Five.
Or-
I don't care what the number is.
Or-
I
yeah.
thought it was 5 when
Mhm.
because I sent my list to Matt and
Right.
it was 5. But
Right.
yeah, 4 or
I don't
5,
want to artificially be limited, just sort of like us to talk through. I think a good place to start is, do we still agree on building out Parks 1 and 2? I think we're going to be pretty unanimous on that.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
Yes.
So,
As soon as possible.
okay.
And I think under that, we need to understand maybe some of the things that we're talking about when we say that. It's not necessarily just that we build it out, but we actually have to create the plan and get the agreement of who, how much, who pays and all that. But yes, build out Parks 1 and 2. And we're not taking on the responsibility now to build it because we haven't been, you know, the town entirely. We're saying that part of the plan to build out Parks 1 and 2 is reach agreement on how it gets paid for, when it gets paid for, and when it gets built.
I have a mechanical question. Are we trying to determine right now what the 4 priorities are in the next few minutes, and then we're going to drill down on each of these topics? Because I don't want to, I have a lot to say about Parks 1 and 2 and the financing agreement, and I think that's worthy of a discussion. Is that something we're discussing today in detail? Because I don't think there is unanimous agreement around Parks 1 and 2, and the mechanical approach to do that, right? So, and if you like my comments around Parks 1 and 2, I could go there, but if we're going to stay around, hey, let's just quickly get over what the priorities are for 2018, you know, I would agree with the 4 priorities. I'm fine with dropping transportation. It doesn't, just because you prioritize something doesn't mean it's your exclusive list of what you're going to focus on. And last year was sort of the year of transportation. We did a lot, right? And the Transportation Safety Committee is really thankful for the support that the board gave. I don't think we'll do any less next year, but it was a bit of a reset last year. And if this 2018 is going to be, if we're going to reset something else, like broadband or how we deliver broader utilities to the community, I'm fine with making that an approach instead of transportation. But I think we should just agree.
I like what your approach, though. Can we just go around and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever number we have as top, just say them? Just sort of to get out there.
Well, I thought we just did that
Right.
by saying that we agree with this, the 3 at least, and then what other one would we, or 2, would we pick out of
said
the?
2.
Possibly 1 or 2, right?
Oh, well.
I'm not limiting it. And then we started with, I think you asked us, start with Parks 1 and 2. Are we in agreement that that should be a
But
priority?
I think
And then to follow up on
Kevin's
that,
question is good. How much detail do we want to go in initially?
not
do
as
we
much
wanna
as he's
go
talking about,
down?
because that's the tactical of how we go
Right, so
about
we
going
just-
after it.
Right, so today, we have 3 hours and 20 minutes together left or whatever. So are we trying to get over to help us, I was a little confused about the agenda. When I frankly saw the priorities, I thought this became a list of things we were going to discuss. I think if this is an agenda, the first point on the agenda is determine the priorities, and then the second point on the agenda is talk about broadband. The third point on the agenda today is Parks 1 and 2. I'm just legitimately confused.
Yeah, I think the end goal is getting a list of priorities, whether we would
End
like.
goal today?
Pardon?
The end goal for today or the end goal in 5 or 10 minutes?
Today, that's
Today.
agenda item number 1, priorities.
Yes, today, and whether that's, I don't think it'll be in 5 or 10 minutes, but I think it would be useful to go through the detail that you were talking about maybe before we kind of finalize the list of top 5, hear everyone's thoughts, because that might cause someone to.
All right, so I feel like I'm being thick here.
No, you're
So
not.
agenda item number 1 is the priorities.
Right.
Agenda item 2 is what?
Is,
Smoking regulation,
and
parks and
Okay,
open
when we
space.
ask for topics for the retreat, and somebody says, at the retreat, I want to talk about broadband and civic space, that somehow didn't make the agenda?
Well, it's in priorities, so we're going to be talking about it. I mean, so that agenda item number 1 is our priorities. All of those things are subsets within that, and we can talk about that for the next 2 hours. I mean, it's the most important thing
Yeah,
that
I
we need to
agree.
I mean,
discuss on the
literally, we
agenda.
could spend the whole meeting
Yeah.
talking about that. in
Which
my
I agree,
opinion,
so,
and
but
I think we
if the
really should
objective is
focus
to
there.
talk about, like, we could agree, I think we could agree in the next 6 minutes on what the top 4 priorities are. Maybe I'm being naive, but then that just means those are things where, like, clearly a priority is going to be resolved, the civic space thing, right? Let's just pretend that's one we'll all align on. Great. Are we then going to talk in detail about the civic space, or no, we've just agreed it's a priority, now let's move on to the smoking?
I think we should talk in detail about
I agree,
priorities.
but that's not what I heard. That's just not what I heard. I heard we're going to do the priorities and then talk about smoking.
What you define, no. What you defined was the process, and
Okay.
I understood. What are our top priorities? And then within those top priorities, let's go into more detail
Okay,
about
perfect.
them.
I'm good with that. Thank you.
But first, we have to define what we believe are going to be the priorities.
Yes.
And I think that what you just added, which is understanding the civic space and what that implies, the $10 million for that to me is a priority that could replace, it's just not the space, rec versus civic space, what it looks like, but actually that issue about how it gets paid for and who pays for it is a priority in my mind.
And so when I had initially sent around the kind of revised list where I tried to group things, I wasn't trying to necessarily direct in anything. I was just trying to say, like, okay, these seem to be overlapping here, and I didn't eliminate any of the topics that I wanted. If they were slightly different, I wanted them to be reflected. The reason why I kind of grouped it is broadband, parks 1 and 2, rec center, civic space, development in the commercial core of the town center, and then development other, and then just a miscellaneous topic for the other issues is, on the development side of things, because we did have those priorities from last year, I agree with what was said earlier, that there was unanimity in terms of focusing on the commercial core, with, the plaza area. Here, when I looked at these development issues, I look at, if we just have a topic as, development as a priority, well, that's not helpful. It's too amorphous, it's too large of a topic. So I thought that it would make sense to just kind of talk about these things discreetly. So my suggestion is, let's just go through the priorities, the headings list, broadband, park 1 and 2, rec center, civic space, commercial core development, then the miscellaneous topics, and see what everybody thinks about these issues, and then we can prioritize if those actually.
So talk detail first, and then come up with a list at the end?
That would be my suggestion. So we can just go through the issues. I mean, if we want to do a straw poll first,
No, I'm fine with that. I'm fine.
that's
We
fine
kind of
too.
already did. We said that 3 of the 2017 are categories, and then we need to identify 1 or 2 more that would be added to that.
And frankly, the first 4 or 5 of these topics are those priorities that we've already identified.
Slip into those, yeah. So now, I think, now comes a discussion about, among the 3, how these fit into those 3 overall priorities, and then what additional separately identified priorities might get added to the first 3.
Restate the 3.
They're the 2017 Recreation Center / indoor space, which 6 of us last year said were a priority. Downtown Superior development and completion of Main Street, 6 of us said it was a priority. Transportation issues, we've already said moves off, not as a priority, but a continuing effort of work, and then Parks 1 and 2. So the three are Parks 1 and 2, Downtown Superior Development, and Recreation Center / indoor civic space. Now, we might want to take that first one and split it into two, but that's where we now start the more detailed discussion.
And my suggestion is the same with the rec center and civic space component. We should split those two as well.
Right.
But we can talk about that.
I think I just said that, didn't I?
Well,
Yeah, the
okay.
recreation center and civic space, that was a priority last year, most
Yes, okay,
likely
I
should
agree
be
with you.
split. Okay, so we have four then, now, overarching priorities that we.
I'd like to, well, I think Rex, I think from a prioritization, for the purpose of today's conversation, because of the nuances of the rec center versus civic space is sort of separate topics, but I think it's appropriate to bucket them in a 2018 priority, as we did 2017, rec center, civic space. I think that's appropriate, just for efficiency.
Okay.
Fine.
Then we have the other issue, I think, that you brought up, or someone brought up about, maybe it was you, Kevin, which was one of my priorities, is understand this $10 million civic space commitment as a
Yes.
separate priority. Not what the space looks like, but necessarily how that.
My view is that's sort of part and parcel. That's we got to roll up our sleeves and do the work and get the answer and hope everybody
Right.
agrees on the right answer.
And that's also part and parcel of the Parks 1 and 2 discussion, so. you know.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, so let's just take it from the top and go broadband.
Okay.
And go diving a little deeper now. We've got our top three. We can add two more at the end of this more detailed discussion. We good?
I'm going to
That plan?
say, first, stick my neck out. There's no guillotine in sight. It's not a priority for me in 2018.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll go next and just say, for the financials I saw, this to me feels like an easy phone call or two. We've heard anecdotally that Lafayette's not interested in partnering. I have no interest in partnering with Arvada. It just feels like too much of a leap. If Louisville is interested in partnering, then potentially that's might move up the priority list, but I have no idea what they're in. But this, based on the financials, based on what we saw, I would be disappointed to identify this as a priority and spend a ton of time on it, given the fact that the financials are so disappointing.
Well, I think this is a priority of mine. It was a priority of mine last year. Given the voters' approval of this topic in 2016, they asked us to strongly consider, and it passed with 90% of margin, to strongly consider this issue. We did that in part, and we hired a consultant. They gave us an idea as to what this would look like from a feasibility perspective and a cost perspective. Now the opportunity is just potentially partnering with Louisville. They went through the same process of asking the voters if they should consider it. Their voters, again, overwhelmingly passed that. So we have an opportunity of potentially partnering with Louisville. I think before we discount this, we owe it to the voters to at least fully explore partnering with Louisville to see if there's an opportunity for us to bring broadband on a municipal level to the community, because there still is demand for an alternative to Comcast and CenturyLink. If it's not financially workable, that may ultimately be the conclusion that we draw. But I think it's premature to make that decision now without knowing what Louisville is going to be doing. Because if Louisville is actually thinking about going to the voters in 2018, then I think it would be smart for us to partner with them and go to the voters in 2018 to see if this is something that the voters actually want. But I think for us to kind of discount that opportunity right now before we know where Louisville stands, where Louisville is in terms of their feasibility study, I think is foolish, and we're not doing our job to actually listen to the voters and explore this issue completely.
See, can we just have a dialogue, or you want to go around? So my response to that is, I agree with everything you said. Like, yeah, let's take those polls. But this is my problem. This is the objective of setting a list of priorities. If I raise my hand and say, I want broadband to be a priority, that means every 2 to 3 meetings, we should be talking about broadband. What are we doing? What are we doing? But if Matt and Louisville sort of can reach some arrangement where hey, there's an opportunity for us to collaborate, then
Should be
yeah,
put on the agenda.
Of course, we'll agenda and we'll figure it out, and you'll have like complete support to make the best decision for the town.
Right.
But if you just, that's why I don't love this prioritization process. For me, there is this, if there's like different things that need to occur before this becomes something that I'd like to prioritize, and there's just staff work that needs to be done.
The reason to prioritize it, in my opinion, is because it's going to require going to the voters if we decide to do this. You know, that's something that's time sensitive, that we need to actually have all of our ducks in a row by June, July at the absolute latest to make sure that we're notifying Boulder County to get on the ballot. So, you know, we need, I mean, July's going to be here before we even know it. So we need to make sure that, you know, if Louisville is actually going to do something, that we're going to be partnering with them, that we're in a position to actually execute on it. It doesn't need to be something that we spend every single meeting talking about. We just need to make sure that we're diligent enough to take the steps necessarily to send this to the voters if that's something that we want to do. You know, this can be a priority without necessarily encompassing 25% of our time and effort. You know, it doesn't necessarily, all of these priorities don't
It can
necessarily
also
require
be-
the same amount of time.
It can it can be in this category I was talking about at the outset, action items. But I'm doing what Kevin's doing. I'm picking priorities based on where I really want some significant staff time spent. And that will be dependent. It will involve making some calls.
Mhm.
And if Louisville is ready to do something, or as on the agenda, Arvada or something like that, then staff absolutely needs to bring it forward and tell us. But absent that, we're sort of in a hold pattern, in my opinion.
Okay.
And I just-
Let's hear.
I was going to say, I just wanted to throw in, I'm the one who brought Arvada to the table because I happened to be talking to the mayor pro tem of Arvada, and he said that they might have an interest in partnering with us on the business side of who, you know, not any of the infrastructure or anything, but when, you know, after you get it in, then you got to have somebody run it.
Right.
And that there might be an opportunity for Arvada, they might be interested in partnering with us in having that administrative function. I don't even, this was one city council person talking to another city council. And so it is not a priority for me. I'll come right out and say, not a priority, but I don't think it hurts for Matt to talk to the city manager at Arvada and see where they are, because maybe there is some value in the combination of the administrative, might be, but it is way down my list, and I would not say it as a priority at this point.
The presentation by the consultant basically said it was not a good deal for the town to do this. It was not financially viable project. It would take too long to pay it back, and the uptake would be too low. You know, the number of percentage of people that took, that's clearly in the document.
I don't think that that was their conclusion. I think that that was the conclusion that you drew from the presentation.
No,
that they
that's a
gave.
conclusion they stated, that, and it was in their document, that they said our town, given these financials, they would not recommend that we go forward with it. So that's also in the documentation. They didn't say, absolutely don't ever do it, you know, but if you could partner with someone else, that's a good idea. And I think, you know, keeping it open to partner with Louisville or some other town that may, or partnering with the management of a municipal broadband service with another community would be good, because that was another issue in their presentation, that we were very small, we'd have a small number of people that would be managing, and you have to find somebody else that would, hopefully you would want to find somebody else to do it rather than have staff do it, because we didn't have a department like Longmont or some of the other ones did that would already pick it up. The other thing that, and then so that makes me hesitate to put it down as a priority to try and push it to get it on a 2018 ballot. I think we're too late already to actually, to put together a financially viable option that we could present to the voters to consider. Because we don't have a partnership agreement yet with anybody, and that takes a while to work out, you know, the potential of partnering with another town. I just don't think we could get it done this year. The other thing I'd like to say is that we didn't ask the voters in Superior whether they wanted municipal broadband. We asked if they were giving us the authority to have discussions about it. It's not it was to give us the right to go off if we chose in the future sometime to do that. So we didn't ask the question, do you want municipal broadband? We asked them, could we have the right to have a conversation with somebody else to provide it if we so chose to proceed in that
Right.
direction?
No, but the survey did, for example, and the results on the survey were actually.
Okay, because,
Right,
so,
right.
okay.
That's
so-
what I mean, but not the vote, but
No,
the survey.
I'm talking about the vote.
Right, I
You
know.
know, not the vote that we did. That was to give us the right
Right.
as a municipal government to go and talk to them. So I don't see it as a 2018 priority because I don't think anything can happen on it this year. And I think we need to keep it as something to keep in mind, but I don't see it as a priority, one of the 5 or 4 priorities.
I'll just throw in my 2 cents that I do feel like it is a priority, and I think we need to answer the questions of potential partnerships with other municipalities as kind of the next step, and then see if that leads us anywhere, or if it doesn't, then I'm not seeing a majority of the board for priority or for prioritization or pushing it. So I think it will really hinge on what we find out from exploration with our neighbors. And that's,
But are we agreed that it's still a staff action item to keep in touch
Yes.
with these other communities, et cetera, and bring it forth if there is some development that requires us to, think about this?
Changes the
Yeah,
situation.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, gives new information.
Yeah. So that is the shortfall of what we're doing.
But in connection with that, if there is information that's learned from Arvada, learned from Louisville, and that results in, an opportunity to potentially send this to the voters in November 2018,
Mhm.
I think we need to be prepared to at least make that decision.
Right.
What I don't want to have happen is for us to say we don't have enough time to actually consider this
I
issue.
agree.
I think that's doing the voters a disservice, so we need to either decide one way or the other, yes, we're going to send this to the voters, or no, we're not. But I don't want us to just delay in not doing anything and then saying we didn't have enough time to make a decision. I think that then we're not doing our jobs.
But you're not saying today decide if we're going to send it to
No, I'm saying
voters.
that today we're deciding that we are going to continue to talk to Louisville and continue to talk to Arvada. And in doing so, when we talk to them, if they're in a position where they're giving us the information that says, okay, they're going to go to the voters and they want to partner with us, then we should be prepared to say, okay, let's have that discussion. They may not necessarily get to that point. Maybe they do their
Right,
studies and it might take 9 months and they're not in a position to go to the
Well, the
voters. And then it's not,
Right, so I'm still going to have a couple notable concerns about this, because I think when you look at I looked at the report really did have some phenomenal data, right? So I looked at the report again a couple weeks ago and went through some of the data. If we partnered with another municipality, it's going to be, unless they're willing to underwrite, unless they need us to get them over some, minimum threshold, we'd effectively be asking another municipality to underwrite, using their commercial broadband lines to underwrite our residential. It's still going to be very challenging to get the financials, even with another partnership. But I'd be willing to pursue that, especially with Louisville, because Superior and Louisville are towns that often people think about collectively. I think, we could probably shave some administrative costs through partnering with a town like Arvada or somebody else to have a, shared billing function. But if I was prioritizing, to me, that's not even worth anything. I don't think we should be sending a message to staff that we should be messaging out to Arvada and other colleagues. It was an interesting conversation that Sandy had, but if I want Matt to have a conversation with Arvada, I got 3 things I want them to focus on, and Sandy and Rita know what those things are, right? It is not broadband.
So you're saying something different then, and you are saying that you want no staff time spent on this.
I think it's worth Matt having a conversation with Louisville. Hey, you guys are going to do this, are you interested in working with us? I think you got the brush off from Lafayette. I think I heard that anecdotally, right? So if we get the brush off from Louisville, then that's it. If Louisville says, well, maybe, then I think it's probably worth some consideration. But again, in terms of how I want to prioritize where my level, the cooperation between our town and Louisville, I'm very concerned around ADA. I want Louisville to have some relief off of Monarch. You know, it'd be great to build that other road. I'd love to get their support for a bridge from
Campus Drive.
Campus Drive. There's probably things that I would put in front of, that I would prioritize for Matt and staff in those difficult conversations, not difficult, but in those cooperative conversations with Louisville. If we send the message to Matt that the priority for your conversation with Louisville is to get a deal on broadband, A, that's not my priority, and B, that's not my personal priority, and B, I still don't think we'll get the financials to work, because you still gotta drop those boxes. We just don't have enough, you know, again, unless they wanna underwrite us, we don't have enough businesses to make it work.
So Matt, you've heard the conversation. What do you think is an advisable way for staff to handle the broadband issue in 2018?
Well, we've had discussions with Louisville, and they seem interested. I mean, we had at the Joint Issues Committee meeting, and they expressed interest in possible partnership, but they need to do their study first. So I think we continue to discuss with them. I agree. I think from infrastructure, they're probably the best partner, and if it's going to happen with opportunities, for operations, there could be opportunities. And see what their study says, and then have the conversations with them and see where we're at.
So are you at all conflicted, if this is not one of our top X number of priorities, are you at all conflicted about what we're saying to staff about monitoring this, et cetera? Can you?
I don't
Are
think
you
so,
clear?
because I imagine the Joint Issues Committee will continue to have these conversations, especially since they're doing their study now. So
All right.
those conversations aren't going to stop.
Okay.
Good.
Okay. All right.
Thanks.
Parks 1 and 2. So we've identified that is a priority, and the first step of that is coming up with some financial payback arrangement. Maybe Matt, you could give us kind of an update, if any, on kind of where we are with discussions with Ranch on there.
So we'll have more discussion on Monday when Bill's here on this issue. I'm waiting for a price estimate from Urban Drainage's contractor, and once I have that, it should be in the next 2 weeks. Then we'll go back to Avante and RC Superior and see if there's an agreement. I think an agreement can be done. It's just a matter of what we want or expect the language to be with regard to the $10 million. That was the hang up when we were working on the last refunding agreement. And the board had some discussion with Ryan when he was here, and it sounded like there was some clarification that was made during that discussion. But if we can agree on what we expect or see that $10 million paying for and being included in that, then I think we can go back to them and possibly get an agreement.
Okay.
So, and if we can't agree on that, then what? Are they
And I
done
think
with
we
one?
have to wait until the bonds are issued so that we can build the parks, and they would pay for them.
We have to understand what bonds we're talking about, because they think that they don't have to until they've let $50 million of bonds. And we're saying any bonds associated with any property developed along Parks 1 and 2, or the next set of bonds.
The next set of bonds. yeah.
Right,
That's
so when you say that, till the bonds are developed, that's one of the points that we need to clarify and reach agreement on. Are you talking about the next set of bonds that are issued beyond the 22 million or whatever that are already out there? Or are you talking about this next set after $50 million has been reached? And we don't have an answer to that, but we need to clarify that.
Yeah.
So I think we could all kind of throw out ideas of ways we'd like to see this play out, but I think in reality, we just need to wait until this next round of discussions between staff, attorneys, and their attorneys, and then we can have something to work with. But otherwise, we're just kind of making agreements with ourselves that I don't know that that's a productive use of the next 20, 30 minutes to talk about, well, here's how we
Yeah,
like
I understand that staff's in a difficult position because it is not unanimous from the board that what the direction is, right? I mean, there is, what I heard from Avanti was it would be ill-advised to proceed with Parks 1 and 2, given the uncertainty around the bridge construction over Marshall, right? I mean, that's what, well, I love 1 and 2. I think they're great. I think the developer should proceed. I think we should do everything we can to approve whatever plans they have. I would love nothing more than to see Parks 1 and 2. But number one, I heard it was ill-advised, so I don't think that they will proceed on their own. Number two, I personally have no interest in taking any amount of current funds and advancing them off of to incurring any risk from that $10 million. And frankly, even if they were saying, okay, I will give you the $10 million, I still think it would be ill-advised for us to take any of the $10 million until we get to the other side of the conversations around the rec center and community space. So for those three reasons, and I may be in the minority, but I'm not, I think we need to, when we talk about 1 and 2, I'm all about prioritizing 1 and 2, but that's, to me, the developer's job. So, but I may be in the minority there. Not maybe, I suspect I am.
Kevin brought up a truckload of important considerations right there. We really should bullet them on the board. I'm 100% with Rita, but from a little bit different perspective. 2018 must be the year that we arrive at consensus on what 10 million means, what cost-sharing agreement means, what Exhibit B means in terms of commitments to Parks 1 and 2, Rec and Civic, and all that kind of stuff. Simply because, one, we need to know this. Chris and I are the only institutional memory from an elected official standpoint participated in the real thick and nitty gritty and Matt, I mean elected. And we've got to have those conversations. What did we think this meant when we agreed to it, right? And any future board can certainly say, well, so what, or whatever. But I would like you guys to understand what we meant or what we thought we meant, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, because it troubles me greatly. I never accept ambiguity in a document if I can avoid it, and it really troubles me when I get that word applied. Well, it's ambiguous, it's ambiguous, it's ambiguous. Well, that should have been addressed back in the day, right? Before those documents were accepted. So that's a little element. You didn't say that, but it triggered it in my mind. And I do recall the conversation about, and some of us discussed it, Marshall and the bridge, and why have the parks that nobody can get to, right? And then we've got the additional conundrum of the possible development at McCaslin and whatever Marshall. That also needs to be addressed in there. So I'm going to go back to Matt on this. Where are we? We've had 2 or 3 months that have transpired now since things sort of hit a brick wall on Parks 1 and 2 with Avanti. But I'm interpreting that after the gentleman came to the meeting.
Right.
Ryan?
That things sort of, we hit the reset button on that, and we opened up conversations anew, and that's what's in place right now is those, when do we expect, is Bill coming forth on Monday with anything that you know of in terms of how that might work, or is that between you and Mr. Avanti?
Yeah, it includes Ryan as well.
Okay.
And Bill may have some additional information for us on Monday.
Is Ryan from Avante here Monday?
He's not.
So Bill will be speaking for Avante Monday?
Yeah.
As opposed to the last time, he wasn't speaking for Ryan, because Ryan stood up and said he doesn't speak for me. So to Monday night, he has the authority to speak for Avante?
I mean, they are the managing
Yeah.
partner in the project,
Okay.
so.
Remember that, though, when he
Who's-
stood up
who's they,
and took
Bill?
over and pushed
RC Superior.
Bill aside?
Yeah.
So the discussion about the development agreement, right, from March of 2013, and then cost sharing agreement from October of 2013, and Exhibit B to that, that's a discussion that I agree with everybody that has overlapping, ramifications for the Rex discussion, maybe the civic space discussion. So that needs to be reconciled. But when we're talking about Parks 1 and 2, so we've already approved an FDP. We have already reached an agreement on what the parks are going to look like. I believe everybody shares the priority that we want to see these things built as soon as possible. Now the question is, by whom, who's paying for it, right? So that's the thing to iron out.
Well, and
But-
when?
And when, but so.
Kevin had added when.
Right. To my priority here, I view 2018 as a success if the Coal Creek improvements start this year and the grading work is done on that land. That to me means like we're making progress, and it's not just another year goes by without any sort of progress. I think at the end of the day, when we're talking about what makes sense in terms of the bridge and all that stuff, we shouldn't build the parks before the bridge goes in to tear up part of the parks to put in the bridge. It should be all done at the same time. But we need to get on the same page with Avanti, with Ranch Capital, and refresh their recollection about the obligations that they owe pursuant to the development agreements and pursuant to the cost sharing agreements. But try to get on the same page in terms of the timetable that actually will work for everybody. So, but in terms of talking about the prioritization, I view 2018 as a success if we have some grading work done, creek improvements started, so we're making progress, and we're not just kicking the can down the road and the status quo is the same.
I agree with Mark. I like the way you put that, actually.
And what I recall from that discussion when Ryan with Avanti was here was that they were not ready for the parks now, but I do remember him qualifying that and saying, but we're getting fairly close. And I think that with the progress in the different residential phases, and I think we're going to hear more about that from Bill and where they are with residential phases, I think we could be, 2018 could be the year that they feel like that they're getting where it's time. But in terms of building it and phasing it, I've always believed that the parks and the bridge all needs to be done together at the same time. It makes no sense to do one before the other. Well, parks before the bridge and do bridge later and tear things up. I think that makes no sense. We've got great momentum over here on the south side of things, and the north side of things, and to be able to connect that with a bridge, without a bridge, it really would look kind of silly to not have the connection between the two sides of things.
So we have to keep after them, and them being the developer, and we will, to push as much as we can, because, they've told us that the bridge would be the last thing that they'll build, which would be 15 years from now, and given their current plan. I think that what will change all of that, what could change all of that, is if they build out Block 6, which is on the south side of the park, Coal Creek, I mean. So if they find someone to put in there, like a boutique hotel, that'll change significantly and advance this work. So what we should be doing, I think, in order to help us, we need to help them and push as much as we can to get something built on Block 6, which would be a boutique hotels, which they've always been saying. And that's what we need to ask about and press Bill on Monday night, because 2 years ago, he came to us when he first started working. He came to Clint and I, we met with him, and then he came and presented to the whole board. And he said that was his priority, to build out Main Street in Block 6, which was a boutique hotel. He even talked about 6 or 8 theater screens. That would be a great place to include our civic space right next to the boutique hotel, because the hotel management that they were talking to was interested in partnering with us to manage that.
Block 6 is adjacent to Creekview Way, right?
Correct. It's where the big pile of dirt basically in the hole is, kind of there.
Okay.
But both, the block of dirt going
Yeah,
east
gotcha.
is Block 6. So if we can get Block 6 started, that will change a lot, because they'll have to let more bonds to do the public infrastructure. And trust me, whoever gets building there are gonna want the parks done, because that's gonna be a draw for that area. They're not gonna want to have what's happening now right outside of their hotel door. So in order to help us, we need to help them and push them to get development done on Block 6, which is from Creekview Way, Creekside Way, or whatever they call it.
Creekview Way, yeah.
Creekview Way, up to Main Street. That center section there has got to get built out.
So this is what.
And then a bridge will come in with that too. Trust me, they'll put the bridge in.
I am troubled by everything in this plan, in this list of potential priorities, that says basically pressure the developer to do this, whether it's the area
Block
by
6.
Creekview or whatever. I just don't, I think that's great on paper, but it doesn't happen. The developer, in my opinion, has a whole host of his own priorities that is all couched in market demand. And so while in theory, I'm all for saying, okay, Mr. Developer, your priorities should be by Creekview Way, and it should be by the square, and it should be here and there and the other. I think that just goes nowhere, because he's going to abide by his own priorities. So Matt, how much does us pressuring them about a particular focus within the town center influence anything?
I think it does have an impact. I mean, Main Street took longer than expected, but the added pressure that we started to put on them towards the end there to get it done and open, and, through a variety of ways, I think helped to get that done sooner than what they were planning
But
on.
that's a little bit different than.
Yeah, and the commercial
I didn't
side,
say
but-
pressure though, and I didn't find the word there. I'm saying work with them to, how can we help them so they can help us?
No, but Sandy's point is a good one, because, and I don't see necessarily anything wrong with people being motivated. They're a developer, they're motivated by their economic motivations to turn a profit and to make as much money as possible. In our view, we think that these amenities like Parks 1 and 2 will actually help them, have a more successful project. So I think it's in terms of, driving the synergies. But, to Sandy's point, how do we pressure them? If you have agreements that say what they say, and there are no, upcoming triggers coming, there is no pressure other than trying to enforce the agreement as written. But to the extent that they're not meeting targets, and there's, applications to get an extension to get their vested rights or something like that, that's when there is the potential for a discussion about, okay, well, you need this favor, now, you need to do a favor for us as well.
For example.
And that's going to come up in this year.
It's coming up in March.
In March.
So then that's a really good point you bring up. Do we feel that they have completed their phase 1 development, which then will allow them, the developer, to get an additional 15 years of vested rights? I'm not looking for an answer. I'm thinking we need to have that discussion. You know, because that comes up in March. We have March 11th, I think it is that the date? Is when their 5-year vested rights expire. And in order for them, the development, to reach an additional vested right time perspective horizon, and that's a 15-year horizon, they must have completed phase 1 development. Now, there's a difference of opinion on what phase 1 development is, and that's a really good point you bring up. We need to have that
So the
discussion.
question is, you know, if they have completed it, then they should be able to get it. If they have not, then they're going to need to ask for an extension.
Right.
And if they're asking for an extension, then we have a negotiation.
Mark, we even have a more fundamental issue. Phase 1 changed in definition.
Right.
And if we go back to the original phase 1,
It's not what they're presenting
Yeah.
now as phase 1.
it's not what they're presenting
So
now
that's
as
another
phase
whole
Well, and
discussion.
My staff is, I mean, they're doing the inspections, they've done the inspections for phase 1, so.
No, well, what is phase 1? Because phase 1 is
Phase
defined by
one-
the,
Yeah, go ahead.
okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Phase 1 is defined by the PD plan, Amendment A, Amendment 1, was this from the Coal Creek to, with the Spicer Shuck property, basically, all along Main Street. That was deemed phase 1 development. Phase 2 development was residential then south of that, and phase 3 was along 36. So then when the FDP, that's in the PD Plan Amendment A, 1. Then as the FDP came in, the first FDP that came in was infrastructure along what is now Main Street. And it came in first as a review, and I believe at the Planning Commission, I'd have to go back and look at it, but you know, I was on the Planning Commission, I believe at that time, or maybe I wasn't, it was before it was, but the first FDP as presented did not have phase 1 attached to it, it was FDP 1. Now, in the final draft of that, they added FDP 1, phase 1. So the question is,
It reduced the scope.
they reduced the scope very narrowly, and what that did was then reduce the scope of what completion of phase 1 meant within the first 5 years. Now it only meant public infrastructure along Main Street.
And, yeah, so.
So
yeah,
what you're saying
includes
you're,
Main Street, Superior Drive, the detention, and landscaping
right,
around the detention pond.
right, because then there's a
behind.
1A too, FDP 1A,
Yeah.
which goes phase 1, 1A. So that's, you know, the intent, like Sandy was saying, as defined 5 years ago was different than what it is. But I also hear from a legal perspective, you know, with Mark, that it doesn't matter what the intent was, it's what's documented and can be determined to be the legal contractual obligations. And so I'm asking the question, should we have a discussion about what do we consider to be phase 1? Because phase 1, they pretty much basically completed if we base it on their definition of phase 1.
Correct, yep.
Well, intent can matter if things are ambiguous.
Okay.
And that's when things are unambiguous, then it doesn't matter what your intent is.
Right. So
But-
this is another area where things changed at the last minute, which totally changes the intent of the original discussion and agreement, you know? And I don't know if it would be worth our time to have that
I mean,
discussion.
regardless of what the discussion is, they're coming up upon a trigger point, and we need to just at least be, you know, aware of that deadline, and, you know, what their position
Well,
is in
and-
terms of.
From a staff perspective, we feel like they've completed that phase 1 FDP. The FDP phase 1 FDP that's been completed. Main
Right.
Street is done and Superior Drive is done.
Right, so there will be
Detention pond.
nothing that will come forward to us based on what just Matt said, what Matt just said. They will automatically, on March 11th of this year, be given an additional 15 years of vested rights to complete this development in their time frame any way they want.
It
as
would
long as
only
they
come
meet-
before us if Matt and
Said it, they
staff
didn't
said
complete.
they had not met it.
Yes,
Correct.
right.
Okay.
That's why I asked if it should-
Or if we
is worth
disagree
the
with that.
discussion.
Yeah, we can
Or if we
disagree.
have reason to disagree, we should bring that up.
We have to have the
I don't know
discussion to
enough-
determine whether we have reason to
I
disagree.
don't know enough about it to agree or disagree, unfortunately.
We were going around kind of making comments on parts 1 and 2, and we were up to Sandy, we kind of got off on.
The main thing I'm gonna say about Parks 1 and 2, I want them built, but I don't want them built unless it's the whole part and parcel with the bridge. That's, and I don't want us to spend the
Consensus.
money.
Rare.
That's a terrible word. Agreement amongst the group, but
Yeah.
don't say consensus.
Well, and I think that's significant,
Well, that's
because
what
we've
it
not,
is.
we've not always been on that.
Same page.
On that same
Right.
page. There, we've had this discussion before, and there were some that was like, well, let's,
No,
it
yeah.
didn't really matter, but I think we are kind of
It's
coalescing around
evolved.
the idea of, if they're gonna be built, they need to all be built with the bridge and be built together. So I'm glad for that, because I think that's the only way that makes sense, so good.
But back to Mark's point, I'm entirely with Mark. We want Parks 1 and 2 done as quickly as possible. So whatever we have to do to get it done as a complete and value-added parks per the FDP that we've already approved, we should do everything in our power to push that forward.
And we can reiterate a time value of $10 million, sooner rather than later.
Well, we
gets
need
us
to
more.
first have the discussion if Parks 1 and 2 come out of the $10 million. So and I don't want to go there, I just want to talk,
Right.
because
Right,
we
you're
haven't
being
talked
very
about
careful with
that.
your words, and that's where, which I appreciate, because I think we will not gain agreement if we were surveying around whether or not Parks 1 and 2 should be out of the $10 million civic space contribution.
Right.
There would not be,
We've not talked about how they're paid for or who pays for it. At the moment, we're just talking about the need to develop it per the FDP that's already approved. And it's in all of our best interest to get that done as soon as possible. So we need to do everything we can to push that forward.
Okay. Rec center, civic space.
Yes, I mean, I agree. I guess my ultimate thought on all of these things is it's nice to prioritize things, but, without any sort of goal setting, some sort of identifiable goal,
Right.
they're just aspirational, right? So, I kind of laid out what I thought, success would look like. So I think we made some progress, we're gonna need to figure out these agreements with respect to all of these related issues. But, progress to me is not building these parks in 5 or 10 years. Progress to me is getting started this year.
Well, yeah, it's a 2018 priority.
Yeah, but not just to talk about it, but
Yeah.
to actually start building.
Right,
Right, I'm
Mark,
with you on that.
but you, I like the way you grouped. Coal Creek Corridor is part of this area.
Right.
And we're going to do Coal Creek Corridor in 2018, right, Matt?
Yep.
Okay.
Start
That
this
is
year.
material,
We'll start this year.
especially if you were involved in all of this when Coal Creek was not even going to be touched,
Mhm.
right? It was just going to be as
Left as it
overgrown
was.
and
It
whatever.
wasn't the developer's
Right?
responsibility.
So for those of us who've been here for the long haul, the fact that it is going to be beautiful and starting doing Coal Creek Corridor in 2018 is hugely significant to this area. And maybe we should get some sort of noun that encompasses Coal Creek Parks 1 and 2. So that's what I really like about how you group this, okay? Now, Kevin has made me nervous here in his last comment, because it's a totally different discussion for me if we're talking Parks 1 and 2 out of the general budget and totally on town dime, et cetera, than it is with a component of financing from the TIF and from the agreements and all that kind of stuff. It's totally different. Night and day different, 180 degrees different for me. If the question becomes us building them with no ranch capital involvement ever.
I'd actually argue there's 3 paradigms for the funding on this,
Okay.
and there's probably some nuances within each. But paradigm 1 would be the town is paying, right, out of the general
Right.
fund. Paradigm 2 would be we are somehow taking out of the 10 million, whether or not it's a loan, whether or not you arm twist, where the developer decides they're going to give it to us, but whatever. Paradigm 2 is it's out of the 10 million. Paradigm 3 is it's out of a TIF, it's out of
It's all them.
it's all them, and it's not, and it doesn't touch the 10 million. To me, those are the 3 different paradigms. I'm obviously not remotely supportive of paradigm 1, I'm not supportive of Paradigm 2 until we get to the other side of the Park and Rec Center, because I need to look at these things from a macro cost perspective. And if you spend your money now, we do this at home, you gotta, you can't go out and have, cookies and cake and forget to save money for the mortgage. The mortgage, to me, the big payment is the civic space and getting that decision. And then I think, but if the developer wants to horse trade, or, if they want to say, great, I will fund this thing if you guys agree that I can get, big signs on 36 saying, welcome to the town center, okay. Because when we were going to talk about a developer, commercial core town center, we heard the number one thing the developer wants was signage. That when he brings developers in there, what they want more than parks or anything else, they want signage. What we said was, nope, go back to what we've agreed, we don't agree with any of those signs. So we actually got the developer to come to us saying, this is the most important thing for me, and we sent them home packing.
So can we ask the rest? Is anybody here interested in proceeding with 1 and 2 if it's totally out of town funds?
Well, so the development agreement says that parks are public improvements, and the developer shall build the public improvements. So it is their obligation. And then the cost sharing agreement then modifies, this is how there's going to be a certain amount of money that's allocated, which can be split amongst civic center space and parklands and things like that. But parks 1 and 2 remain a developer obligation. They shall.
So you're saying no?
Well, no, I'm just saying
town.
it's
We don't
their-
have to even talk about it
well,
because
it's their obligation.
Yeah, it's
Now,
their
the
obligation.
discussion is, when, right?
Mhm.
And does that change anything material for what the town is willing to do to get this built? Because, if it's, I'm gonna build it in 20 years when $10 million is worth $4 million, I think it's a different discussion than, if they're talking about, we could build it in the next 2 years. So, I just think we need to be open to it, but.
So just so you all know, and you've heard this 100 times, but you have to remember this going forward. The 10 million was civic space.
Only.
However that's defined. Okay, civic with a small c, right? Civic space. And it was at the last minute on that cost-sharing agreement, the evening before we actually met on a Friday at like 5 p.m., that this Appendix B was thrown at us with 6 million, 4 million splits on it.
So
That's why that was so material. And whether it's here nor there in the future, that is the monumental shift that was made there at the last minute. And if you watch that meeting, I raised holy hell at the time because it was so material in my mind. And, different people had different elected officials had different interpretations, different priorities. But that is what we're still arguing about today.
So
what is civic?
Right.
Can you define
But-
civic out of the cost-sharing agreement?
Well, so first you have to start at the development agreement, right?
Yeah,
So-
I understand that.
And this is why there's
Mhm.
a difference of opinion about certain things. So under section 3.5 in the development agreement from March 11, 2013, that the town is a party to,
Mhm.
okay? That lists, it says the developer shall construct and install public improvements described in the approved PD plan. And that's defined as the public improvements. It says all of which shall be constructed and installed in accordance with the applicable FDP and the town's applicable ordinances. And it says a list of some of the prominent public improvements contemplated by the PD plan is attached here to as Exhibit B. Okay? Exhibit B then has a probable cost summary and lists developed parkland, town center north, 4 acres, and then developed parkland, town center south, 4 acres. $1 million for each of those. And then there's a reference for town hall, which was the $10 million. So there
Right.
was a $12 million of public improvements contemplated by this development agreement.
The original
In
agreement.
in the development agreement. Now, the
Right,
cost
which
sharing-
was the original agreement that started this whole process.
It is, exactly.
Yeah, that's the original
But
first.
the cost sharing agreement from October 18th, 2013, town is not a party to it.
No, this is just how to move the money from Boulder
Right.
County to Sura
Right.
and then over to the STC metro districts.
So, under section 16 of the cost-sharing agreement, it says the developer shall contribute $10 million towards the cost of civic space. And then,
Define civic space there now, and where's
Yeah,
it
how-
defined?
there's
So-
something
Because they
included
add
there that
park-
wasn't in the other.
They add,
so civic space is defined as certain public improvements to be mutually agreed upon by the town and the developer as provided in section 2R of the Town of Superior Ordinance number 0-6, series 2013.
We get memos on this?
But-
Why is this, we have limited time today?
we have till
attorney
5
memos on
o'clock.
this?
But, so the point is that then Exhibit B then has that cost breakdown.
But
of
the
$10
other
million.
significance is that civic space got defined as also including a field, certain fields, which is specifically referencing the field in Park 2.
Well, yeah, I mean, it says a town hall, community rec center, library, public park improvements, and one or more multipurpose athletic.
Right,
fields.
and so public park improvements was added from originally, and I don't know if field was in there or not, but the field that they're referencing is specifically Park 2. Park 2, where the field is going to be?
Rugby.
Yeah, and so there's a lot of intersecting threads here that, where we've taken $10 million for basically town hall, library, civic space, community space, and now we've turned it into also including park amenities, or park improvements, and a field, which we have to figure out once and for all and reach agreement with the developer how that $10 million is going to be spent and when we're going to get it.
I hope first Tuesday after the first Monday in November of 2018. Prior to that, we have given that as much thought as it needs and tried to do that. But it sounds like we are sort of agreed here that we don't intend to fund these without some agreement for some sort of at least partial reimbursement, et cetera, sooner rather than later after we spend the money,
Yes.
that kind of thing. So,
Yeah, we're not doing it out of the goodness of our hearts.
Right,
No.
so there's no, paradigm one, nobody's supportive of.
right.
Right.
So then it becomes, which good, because only a couple months ago, we were talking about lending money from the general fund to the developer, right?
For
So-
open space, yeah.
Right, so that's now off. So now it's paradigm 2 or 3, where I'm personally, I'm not supportive of any of that 10 million going to Parks 1 and 2 without, again, getting to the other side of the civic space, the more traditional civic space community center conversation.
But Kevin, to clean up that not interested in lending money, there's an unless on that we have a pretty ironclad payback.
It's always risk, right? Yes, there's always risk in anytime you lend somebody money, there's risk. And, the covenant we made, I wasn't on the board, but the covenant you made to, you as elected leaders made to town officials were that the original Superior, and I don't mean original town, I mean inclusive of Rock Creek, would not be financially accountable for the developer's effort. And that was the deal you guys struck with us.
That's
Right,
correct.
that was the deal we as leaders struck with the community.
Right.
I am holding myself accountable to that deal.
Right, no, I'm just, we went through all of this with Mark, and he did a great job of bringing out all those documents and reading the pertinent parts. The point is that we did, as a town and as a SURA, sign a cost-sharing agreement which said that part of the 10 million would be used to build the field and certain park improvements. So we got to reconcile that. We're going to have to get down to what does that mean? Is that, and we can't do that today. But I think that's one,
But
not I
Rita,
think.
I'm going to add a little
That's
bit-
going to be my priority.
I'm going to add a little bit to that. If you watch the meeting, it says, because I targeted that last minute 4 and 6 million. Oh, well, this is just this is just suggested. And if you look at under the heading of that exhibit, it says proposed or preliminary or something with a P, doesn't it?
Probable cost summary,
Right.
and it
And
refers
that's-
to it as estimate.
That's how I was shut up, frankly. they said, oh, you're getting too anal about this, it's not 4 and 6, really, this is just probable, these working numbers, et cetera, et cetera. And now, this many years later, it's like, no, this is what we agreed. No, this was probable, this was preliminary, it was proposed, et cetera. It is not hard and fast.
No. Well, that to me is a priority, and maybe it's more of an action that we have to resolve as a group here. We need to come to collective agreement with what we expect and what the intent was, and then we have to work with the developer to reach agreement on that. I'd like to see this documented this year, once and for all, what's going to be paid for, when, how, kind of a thing.
Well, I agree with Rita. I mean, because reconciling, what the obligations are under all of these various agreements is critical for 3 of these priorities. So, we really can't make any headway on any of these priorities without making headway on this as well. So, I think the focus is on, staff, town attorney, ranch's council. Let's get together, reach an agreement, because there's issues that they're going to want us to address and issues that we're going to want them to address. So we're going to need to just.
So in terms of our board priorities, can we broaden this bullet point of Parks 1 and 2 to basically call it the Coal Creek Corridor and Parks 1 and 2?
Right.
And Coal Creek Corridor is the priority.
And that includes grading, creek improvements, so yeah.
The whole project.
Yeah, I
And
think that's a good
2,
idea.
the clarification of the interaction of all these agreements.
Well, I think that's a separate and very important point, like you said, because it intersects or crosses 3 things. I think that's a priority by itself.
Well, right now, I think.
I don't mind it as long as we add
priority
one
number-
more priority to what we can have.
One priority is clarification on this whole funding mechanism, right? That is
And
out.
agreement with the
Right,
developer.
Right, yes,
Mhm.
right. And then Coal Creek, Parks 1 and 2, grading, priority number 2, and then we can talk about rec center and civic space. But, all of that kind of flows from having guidance and, resolution of the areas of
I'm agreed.
disagreement.
Okay?
Okay.
Sandy, are you agreed?
Yeah.
We're talking about the $10 million.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I just think that we have to be a little careful if we prioritize, if you make one of the priorities, figure out the 10 million, trying to figure out a way to say this. I don't know if we necessarily, if it's in our best interest to actually reach agreement with the developer. We have a particular interpretation. We've told them what our interpretation is. They've told us what their particular interpretation is. As far as I'm concerned, I want 10 million as soon as possible for traditional civic space. If we spend all the 10 million and there's nothing left, we have that initial agreement that says they're responsible for the park improvements. Yep, the 10 million was spent on this beautiful rec center's brick and mortar civic space building. The park improvements are still required. Go fix it in 2018, 2020, 2021. That's, to me, would be a reasonable approach. If we're forced to the negotiating table because this board says it's priority to resolve the 10 million, then.
It's, by the way, not just the 10 million, it's the financial things. But-
Well, it's really, the 10 million is really the primary issue, right? So if the developer comes to us and says, all right, I'll tell you what, I will build all your, let's just play this what I can. I'll build all your parks if you agree that of the 10, that I'm going to give you $10 million, $5 million of it is for parks and $5 million of it is for civic space. That to me is not a good deal, because I want all 10 million for brick and mortar civic space.
Right, but what you want is not what the developer believes that they've agreed to.
Yep.
Based on the cost-sharing agreement, so it doesn't matter what you want.
I understand, but
That's
it's-
why we have to reach some
but it's
kind of
first-
agreement,
but it's
otherwise we're going to be at a
first-
stalemate here forever.
I disagree, because it's first in. The second.
What is first in?
The 10.
No.
The 10 million is only one.
No,
You only
no,
got 10 million
no,
one.
wait a second, Kevin, you go back to all the 29 approved expenses that have already been identified, presented for payment, future payment out of the TIF. that we've gone through that our external, I'm looking at Martin, our external engineer has reviewed. How much, I don't want to expect you to answer this, but we should get that answer. How much of the 10 million has already been identified as approved for
I asked
reimbursement?
the question in a board meeting 6 weeks ago, 0. All 10 million is available.
No, that's not
That's what
true. That's not true based on the 29 expense.
But I
Well, don't just sit there and say, I asked.
Well, that's what
So
staff.
We
but this
need
is
to
what's
find
frustrating.
out for sure.
So this is, I asked the question, staff responded to that question, $0 of the 10 million has been spent.
Been spent,
Say it again, Matt.
been spent.
Spent or committed?
How about?
Been identified in those 29 requests for
10 million.
expense?
No, I'm trying to,
Yeah, I know what you're trying to say. You're trying to say that they
No
haven't
money's been
submitted any
spent out of the 10
expenses?
million.
Have they submitted any expenses?
yeah, I
In
mean,
their-
the Village Green Park.
Right,
has
so.
been approved.
Say the-
So it has, that's what I'm saying, that
It is
we,
committed.
we have committed $663,000 or whatever it was, 600 and some million, not million, thousand for Village Green was approved 3 or 4 years ago. It is being built right now, I will look at it every
Right.
morning. It's being built, they're putting in the irrigation and all that. And remember a few months ago that Bill Jenks stood up there and said, Village Green now is going to cost, or maybe it was even, yeah, I think it was Bill Jenks told us at one point, I got it written down in one of my documents, 1.3 or 1.4 million. And that's already subtracted out per their analysis out of the $6 million of the 10 million for that. And then they said that they spent for landscaping around the cemetery, which is Park 3, that will be, I'm sure, already have been submitted or soon to be submitted as a valid expense against the TIF, as a public improvement, and that will be subtracted out of the $6 million of the $10 million. They've submitted all kinds of expenses over the last 4 years associated with keeping stuff out of the creek, putting up black paper, seeding Mount Muckle, which I called the first pile of dirt, not the second pile of dirt that we have here, but they actually seeded the big pile of dirt that CDOT
Some
took
of these
back.
costs will come out of a different category.
They're coming out of the other
So this
$6
is what-
million.
so this- I'd like there to be a.
But no, you can't just, you went and said flatly, I asked, they said no. I'm telling you that if you look at those, which I do, there has been money already allocated and approved
This
to
is,
be
to
allocated.
me, this is I'm asking a question of staff. I asked the question once, if my question of staff was not clear, a very clear answer, I'd like to know, I understand there's
We
different
can provide
buckets,
that.
but the bucket, I asked it very clearly, but the bucket that I'm most concerned about is that 10 million civic space bucket, right? If a park improvement or capital improvement or infrastructure improvement is otherwise qualified as something that's reimbursable under the TIF as opposed to pay for the developer, that's interesting to me, but not as interesting as how much of the 10 million is remaining.
Well,
But the 10 million is in the TIF.
I
See,
understand,
yeah.
but I understand.
But Kevin has a
But there's a
good
10
point
million
here.
there's an excellent clause that got put in that says, we as the board can direct $10 million for civic space. Now, we argue about what that means, right? But to me.
Where is that clause?
Mark, you can help us find it, but.
No,
there-
you're saying that the.
I'm oversimplifying
Yeah,
it,
you're
but yes,
oversimplifying.
right.
You're-
But it's civic space, and then it's a
You're
little wishy
modifying
about,
the-
right, about a little about what that exactly
Mm-hmm.
means. But there is a provision that we could direct you to build this brick and mortar, we could direct you to build this thing, and it's up to us to design, and then you will fund it, and then it's reimbursable under that $10 million cap. We have the control over the $10 million.
But they have already went past that because that no longer applies per the developers.
So
view.
the
no longer applies.
ultimate question here is, the developer's taking the position that there's this $10 million that can be used for Village Green for, all these
Park improvements.
park improvements. Let's just say Village Green costs $10 million. Then what?
We're done.
Mark, there's even a
We're
broader
done.
So
question.
what happens to any other obligations under the FDPs
there's
and
a
development agreements.
broader accounting issue here.
They don't have to build.
If in
anything
this accounting thing with the independent engineer and the application of expenses, help me out, Sandy, you're in this, the application of spendings to commitments or actual expenditures to line items. If there's a line item in there that is for this $10 million commitment, from a legal perspective, that's material. If we accept against that 10 million commitment, 10 million, this 664 on up to 1.4 or whatever for Village Green, if we allow that to be applied and we don't contest that, no, it should not be applied here, instead, that should be applied $200,000 towards this grading expense down here in Group 3. Remember what we were talking about?
Right.
Et cetera. If we allow these incremental here and there and the other to eat away at this 10 million, I don't think we can go back later in time and say, oh, no, it should never have been done that way. So I think we need to really be careful
That's why it's
how
so
we
important.
allow this all.
Can we look at it right now on
Because we've
Dropbox?
approved this park.
Martin?
Right.
We've
Can't
accepted
you
it.
see how much has been spent already on those two?
But so
line
this
items?
again, like, comes down to, so there's a difference between a cost sharing agreement, which deals with TIF money, right? And the town's not a party to it, and a development agreement, which deals with the development, which is a contract that the town is a party to, right? Other developers don't have TIF, right? So somebody comes up and they want to build some apartment buildings, and in
They'll have a
connection,
portion. They
and in
could have a
connection,
portion.
and in connection with that, FDP,
Mhm.
they agree to construct certain improvements, right? So what if they put up the building and they say, I'm not going to landscape this? Then what does the town do? And so this, probably need a memo from Kendra in terms of legal advice for the board, but, that's really the issue here is, what happens when the developers don't actually finish the obligations of the approved FDPs?
Well, you're absolutely right. See, where you're heading is absolutely correct. But the problem is, we have no leverage at the moment or any ability to order them to do anything because they haven't built anything along Coal Creek Parks 1 and 2. So, but if the position is that the developer says you've used up all your $10 million already and we still haven't built Parks 1 and 2, then the developer starts building out blocks 7, 6, and 5, 6, and 7 along the creek here, or along the south side of the creek. Then we could insist in their FDP that they complete those park improvements. Otherwise, we don't approve their FDP. I think we would legally have the right to do that. But at the moment, since there are no FDPs coming forth along the park, we have no leverage. We have no leverage with them because they haven't asked to build anything yet there, so we can't insist that they do those improvements until they actually.
Well, how we are
elect
allocating these committed or actual expenses on that document, to me, needs to be addressed, and we need to be fully aware of what we're accepting here, because we are creating basically this tacit agreement and that we're in agreement with what they're asking in
Right.
terms of how those are applied from an accounting perspective. And if we don't like it, we better speak up pretty quickly.
Yeah,
I
well,
mean,
we
right-
can look at the last one.
Right now, we don't even literally know what he's spending on the Village Green. He literally might come back
Yeah, they haven't
and
bid
say,
it out yet.
and
Yeah.
he might spend 4 million. And if that's blown down against their 10 million, we're in trouble.
Yeah.
So I do think, going forward, we shouldn't approve a darn thing unless we have agreed to what the financial commitment is on whatever they're building. Okay, we'll agree to approve this, but only if you spend a maximum of $5 or whatever it is.
Or it's not being applied towards the 10 million, it's being applied to
Because-
them.
Right, if they would apply something.
We had that discussion at the town board meeting when they came back and wanted an extension because they weren't going to complete that per the SIA that they originally had for the FDP, the first FDP. So we've extended that
Several times.
several times, two times probably. And then, remember, that's when we had the discussion, I can go back and find it, I wrote it down, I said, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
It's no longer $668,000 to outfit this little 6/10 of an acre park, but now it's gonna be 1.3 or 1 point something million. And he, I think it was Bill, said that will come off of, and maybe it was the other person, but that will come off of your 6 million of your 10 million. And then we said no, because we talked about inflation. How can you cost more because you've delayed, charge more because you, the developers, delayed against that? And then we talked about the inflation factor, and anything over and above what was agreed to in the original FDP from 2 years ago is what counts against the number, not additional inflation. We had that discussion, and then also, I think we directly asked the question to the developer, are you intending, aren't you, to spend more than $6 million to build out parks in the Superior Town Center? And he said no. He said no.
So can we, Paul's in the room, he's hearing us talk. I'd be curious for his perspective on this. Is that possible?
On
this allocation of current expenses and commitments towards the 10 million in that document that's in Dropbox.
Do you do that, Paul, or do we get that from Martin usually? When that pops
Or
into our
Martin,
Dropbox?
whoever's the,
Oh,
All you
maybe a
together.
staff review, but generally it comes to me and I will send the letter saying
Okay.
we certify these costs.
Okay.
And I agree with Matt that there have been no expenses certified to date that come out of that $10 million figure.
how about commitments? Or,
I'm seeing costs. I'm seeing
He's seeing
capital
actual
expenditures.
expenditures, so that's good. So the
So
answer
how
we
would
go
you
back
deal
to
with
is
that?
that they
Let's say
haven't
you
spent the money.
The first test would be on the Village Green. They're gonna bid that out, they're gonna construct it this year, and now,
right.
through the third-party engineers, submit to be reimbursed.
So how had you intended to
Yeah, what's the budget?
allocate that from an
Well-
accounting perspective? Or had we thought that far ahead? I'm wondering how we had intended to do that, because it could rapidly eat away.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, I'll just take the night, if, I get nervous about the developer holding the 10 million, if they could spend it, in theory, spend $4 million on Village Green. I'd rather just say, all right, just give us the $10 million, we'll hold it. We know they won't, right? Because
They don't have it.
they don't have it. So, I mean, that's what's kind of absurd about this whole, the fact that they.
Well, the original 10 million was not supposed to come out of TIF, it came out from the developer. The original development agreement is that the developer was supposed to provide, I think the 10 million.
I don't think we should look at it and say the original, because to me.
What
they're-
we're a party to.
No, they're different.
Right, you're right.
There's obligations, and then, there's obligations to construct certain improvements. And then there is a means for them to access taxpayer dollars through the TIF agreement, right? To offset some of those obligations. And that's the way we need to be thinking about it. So,
I'm in entire agreement with that, I'll start saying that. The developer agreement with the town says, and it's below, look at the exhibit B on the developer's agreement, where is the $10 million listed?
That's under town hall.
But is it beyond the, what's a number above it? Is there a 110 or $109 million number above that number?
So the development agreement, Exhibit B, states, again, public improvements probable costs summary as of March 8th, 2013.
Right.
And under parks and amenities, there's developed parkland, Town Center North, 4 acres, 1,015,000. Then some open space, 1,700,000. Developed parkland, Town Center South, 1,073,000. Naturalized open space, Town Center South, 1,510,000. And then underneath that, there's buildings, parking, and architectural enhancements.
Uh-huh.
And under the line item for town hall, there's $10 million listed.
Is it before the total? Is there a subtotal?
Yeah, then the subtotal is $198 million.
Right.
Okay.
That's the number we're
But the
getting
10 million, you see, is set as a separate line item there, and that was the way it was intended to be. If you go back to
Yep.
actual conversation, and presentation by the developer, the 10 million was going to be a contribution from the developer to the town for, for
Still
this.
is.
It is, still. And then it morphed before the cost-sharing agreement got completed, and the developer then presented it differently, that it was no longer a $10 million contribution from the developer, but it would come out of the TIF.
Good.
I'm saying the presentation from the developer morphed into that. They changed over the months from March till October. They changed how they were presenting. The 10 million was always a grant or gift,
Yeah,
basically, to the
right.
town. And then it became a part of the TIF in the final agreement with Sura. And so I love what you're saying, and I think that's exactly the way we should talk about it, is that there is a $10 million grant or payment from the developer that's due to the town.
For us to use as we see fit.
Correct, right, which was always what it was. And there was also supposed to be some land that they were going to provide, but they will provide it basically, because if it's built there in the town center.
But that's
So,
what we believe. But I don't think the developer believes
no,
that.
that's why I said number one priority needs to be, we need to reach agreement on this and have this document.
But I see, that's why I'm not, so this is why I started this down in this rat hole, because getting agreement with the developer, to me, is because we have our interpretation, they have theirs, negotiating with it. I'm not interested in negotiating something, anything less than, I want $10 million.
Well, I'm agreeing with you, but look, go back in what you just read, $1.5 million for open space to the south. They never paid.
That's not a payment, that's just a budget. This
They
is-
never, that expense never came out of their pocket.
Right, this is the
They-
it is the
because that's
probable
tract.
cost of it.
Now, wait a
Right,
second,
right.
because that's tract H, which we took on as a town.
We shouldn't have, but okay.
And we spent that 1.5 million out of our open space funds, and they paid none of that money for that open space. So as you sit here, and we have things that we can go back to them too and say, here's 1.5 million you never spent. You were always going to have to give that open space to the town. That wasn't anything out of, we knew we were going to take ownership of that. But when we did that, we took tract H, and then we, as a town, spent money to irrigate it, plant it, put trees in there, put a $360,000 concrete path in there to nowhere. But so that, right now it's still to nowhere, but a lot of people use it. It's very used. But what I'm saying is, we already have accepted things off of their expense sheet, and we've taken them on. We took on Coal Creek Corridor, which we could have forced them to do some grading and things up to the creek. Coal Creek Corridor, I'm just talking about now. We're going to do that too. And there are things that we're taking on as a town, which I think are good things to take on. But now they need to step up, and we need to leverage that to go back and get the $10 million. And anytime when you have two contracts, what appear to be two separate contracts, and two different opinions of both sides, you've got to reach some kind of a agreement, because otherwise you're going to sit there and argue about it forever. But I think we have to reach agreement. I'm not saying to give up more than what's in the best interest of the town to give up, but I think we need to reach agreement.
Okay, we need to move on to other topics.
This was a good discussion.
It was. It was.
And I
think-
value the input from Mark, because he works on this kind of stuff all the time. And in the past, when we've had these discussions, it's just been some of us who remember what was said or how it was said, and we didn't have the benefit and the value of his legal expertise to actually look at some of these.
fresh read and the legal.
Well, we
And
also-
define it more appropriately.
So what is the priority we're putting on there?
We need to reach a resolution as to an understanding of obligations and
Payments.
the schedule for which payment and construction is going to occur related to parks and civic space contributions.
Correct. Good.
Good, okay.
Okay?
Clear?
I
Okay.
appreciate this discussion.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm
So
not
I've
sure
been
it's going
wanting
to
to
be a
have a-
resolution. I think prioritizing this, every time the developer comes up and we start talking about I'm gonna do this or that, who's paying? And so, right, so listing this out as a priority makes sense. I'm not convinced that the priority will be resolution,
Yeah.
Yeah, but
but priority.
Not a resolution like the
But-
town,
but
resolving,
Clint just
it's
started-
resolving.
The first word in the priority was resolution out of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but part of it is, I don't think that Ranch or, Bill in particular, like Bill says, if it's in the agreement, they're gonna abide by the agreement. So, and I don't think that there's any sort of, malintent here. This is just reminding people of what the obligations are and getting everybody on the same page, because right now we're not on the same page, so let's get on the same page. And I think we can do that, provided that we just spend a little time and energy focusing on what the agreements say, what the obligations are, and then to the extent that there's something where there is a little bit of a difference of opinion.
First priority is us
Yes.
agreeing. Second is presenting what our interpretation, our collective interpretation is to Ranch. And that's where I think Kevin says, good luck with that,
Well, our direction
I think that's
is,
gonna
our
be more
direction is to
difficult.
staff and to the attorney, spend some time on this, spend some time with their attorney, get
Right.
this more clarified so that we can move on
Right.
and get this.
So we don't have another meeting like we had when we were approving the FDP for the parks, and they came and said, no, we're not gonna do this.
Yeah.
Waiting.
Okay. Rec Center.
Now, are we
we've-
separating rec and civic space? How do we want to talk about that?
well,
I don't
it's-
think it should be separated.
I think it's however the individuals want to talk about it.
Yeah.
I'm not making any presumption, I'm just.
No, I'm not
reading-
either. I'm just
reading
asking
a-
the question.
I'm reading a
Our-
list, so
yeah.
I think as we go around and people talk about it, you can choose to talk together or separate, however you want to.
So I think based on the discussion that we've had with the sports stable and with Impact, based on the work session that we had recently, I really like the idea that we're going to be, partnering, building a pool, having the opportunity to have, workout space, and, I like the idea of separating rec center from civic space. I'm all on board with having a fantastic civic space if we can get $10 million for it, and it's, just the jewel of the town that really brings everybody together. I think that would be phenomenal. Right now, I think we have a unique opportunity that I think we would be foolish to pass up. So I think, I'm concerned if we try to do too much in one location, that we're gonna end up being dissatisfied ultimately with what we're trying to do here. So I think if we build a pool and a workout space and then have, try to force a library in there or some sort of, civic area, I think that it just wouldn't necessarily work. So I think this is where we need to kind of defer to, the experts in terms of, proper design and what would really work in this type of space. I think some meeting space there, so we can have kids' birthday parties and things like that. Sure, that makes sense. If they need some office space in connection with doing this, I'm fine with it being 2 stories, I'm fine with it being 3 stories, I'm open to whatever. But I think a rec center should be a rec center. And then we can focus on actually having a really great civic space separate from the rec component. And it should be in town center, and it should be something that is, I don't know if it has library, meeting space, whatever. Again, I defer to the experts in terms of designing things based on the surveys that we've had, based on the expert consultants in terms of what they think would actually be used, because I want it to be used. But I'm all on board with doing civic space. I think it should be separate from rec, and I think, again, like part and parcel with a resolution of all these issues can help determine where it's going to be located, when we're going to build it, who's going to be paying for it, and all of that. But
So before we get too far into this conversation, Sandy sent out an email that said we got to be very careful what words we use here, and I couldn't agree more. And I really want to shy away from using rec, because I think Mark is making rec be sports and fitness and that kind of thing, whereas other people might call rec pottery and other recreational pursuits that are not, physical activity, et cetera, et cetera. So am I correct? You mean more of a workout, fitness, sports, that kind of facility over at Impact, and not worry about the other activities you might have, you know, cooking classes, dancing classes, plays, art, whatever. And Sandy, you have to weigh into how you would define all that.
So to answer your question, you know, I don't necessarily care what we call things.
Right.
You know, I just
But
care.
what would we do? You would
Well,
never
I
have a
care about what
pottery
they are,
class over
right?
there.
No, I mean, I think
Yeah.
that, again, I would defer to the experts in terms, you know,
Right.
if somebody says, you know, pottery classes totally work right next to workout facilities, and that's the consensus here, I'd be
But
really
what I'm
surprised at that.
interpreting, and I want to make
But I mean, I think dance
sure,
classes could be, you know, incorporated into a rec
Impact
center.
and the sports stable.
Right.
Impact and sports stable have expertise,
Sure.
and it's in certain things. I mean, they've got, right now, soccer and golf and hockey and baseball, pitch, you know, whatever that thing is.
Artificial turf
And
teams.
workout
Sure.
and rehab, physical rehab and whatnot. That's what I'm interpreting, that you think we should zone in on this partnership. Bills with their distinctive expertise. They don't have it in pottery and acting classes
Right.
and whatnot. So I'm.
Yeah, and the point is that I think that the space should work for what it is, and it shouldn't try to be something that's not
Everything
going
to
to
everybody.
fit, right? So, and I am not saying, like, let's not do the space for the civic, for the pottery and the dance classes and all that stuff. We should do it all. I want to see it all built on, you know, because
They're not there.
everybody has different interests. We just shouldn't necessarily try to do it all in one location, because I think ultimately we will regret that because it won't work.
Right. So I'd
I
like to
see
hear from
this-
Sandy what she thought.
Well, everybody else can comment. I'm holding my comments for a minute.
Okay.
Well, go ahead.
I see this in phases. We have the opportunity right now to do the recreation phase, and my references to recreation should not be interpreted as, I don't want the civic space. I absolutely want that. It will come when the space is built across the street.
But how do you define rec, Clint? Is it along the distinctive expertise, impact,
Yes.
and sports
Yes.
stable? What we're seeing,
Just
they already have.
exactly
Okay.
what Mark said.
Okay.
So I have a slight, and I have yet a different perspective, where if this were only recreational sport focus at Impact, and we were hold our breath for something else, some more community civic space across the street, you know, I don't think I could hold my breath for that long, right? I just don't see, I worry that that would never happen. For me, in order for this to work, I would like there to be more of a, and we could always expand, right? Because there's, you know, we could start with what we have, and you can take it in phases, but I don't want to just bucket this, what we're trying to do with Impact, as just sport recreation. To me, there is a box that presumably would be built, and we would have, call it 80% use of that box, with 20%, when we would lend out 20% of the box to Impact, right? But then there's also the Impact sports stable area that is, you know, probably 10 times the size of the box we're going to build, and we are going to get some percent of of access to what is currently Impact and sports stable. I do think there is, I agree, I spent some time there this week, I took to heart, it doesn't, you know, there is a lot of concrete, it is a little stinky, I talked to a couple people there, it needs some additional work. I don't understand why there's not doors to keep the flow and the smell. I mean, I think they could do some work in there. But I do think that it is a very unique opportunity for us to get a very large community center, true community center, by building a very small recreational box. Because
You're encompassing
Encompassing
the
that entire
the
area.
630-foot long building.
Right.
Okay.
Right, so that to me
Of
what's very attractive.
Boulder Belly Ice. Yeah.
Right, that to me is what's very attractive to this, not just trying to build a sport recreational box in front of another sport recreational box that happens to be private. And then thinking we're gonna build some, beautiful glass civic space across the way, because, let's face it, the 10 million's gonna be gone, right? And that's, 10 million's gonna be gone.
Unless we intercede.
Unless you intercede, but even, I don't see a plan to taking a material portion of that 10 million to build a more traditional glass, true civic space, right? I mean, so part of what I'm trying to do is, let's get that 10 million as soon as possible. Sports Stable wants to build, it sounds like they want to do, not Sports Stable, but the Sports Stable Impact, they want to do something this year. So fantastic. I think that's great. But if it's just sport recreational, that makes me nervous, because I really took to, you guys really had a voice saying, this is kind of geared towards, the music and the smell and the hockey and the concrete. It's, it needs a little more Dakota paint. It's going to need some investment. And so if we do this, we need to work, I don't know if Luke and team are here, we need to work with Luke and team to make sure we're going to make this investment. We're going to have this $11 million building. We're going to give you 20% access to our $11 million building. We want 20% access to your, $50 million building, and it can't smell like a locker room anymore. You guys got to pretty this thing up. To me, that's the kind of deal that I'm interested in.
So what kind of square footage do you have? What are we talking about in terms of additional square footage that's not over there? I mean, do you have, I'm having trouble visualizing how
I think
would
there's
it be a 4-story tower?
No.
No,
It's a
no.
2-story?
No, I think
With-
it's a
what is it?
couple stories. I mean, we probably don't have the team, I don't know how much time we're gonna spend on this, but I mean, I don't wanna go 4 stories. I like the idea of the 2-story. I love the idea of a rooftop deck that, gosh, we've had such great weather this winter. I wish the pools were open, Love the idea of some rooftop deck up there, because it's gonna have a great view. So, right down Main Street, I think that would be ideal for me, so.
So what would you want to see in there in terms of like the amenities beyond exercise facilities?
Beyond the distinctive competence of impact and.
Well, besides the pool and like workout space.
Yeah, I think I would want to leave, personally, I think you got to leave that to Patrick and with the help from the committees. But I mean, I like some of the suggestions that have been around
Pottery.
Pottery and cooking.
And-
I like some of those suggestions.
And so okay, it's fascinating okay.
And I'll just respond by saying, I think that'd be fine. I really don't have a lot of preconceived notions about the programming. I'm more concerned about, do we build a box there or do we not? And what we put in it, how it smells, what it looks like, where the door is. I don't really have a lot of.
Devil's in the details.
But those things are important. If you go back and you look at the survey, and everybody in this room hasn't been involved in this to the degree that I have for the last 6 years, or that Jim Payne has. I mean, Jim Payne came to ProStack the other night, and the man was so incredibly eloquent on what we have been talking about with this community center. We're not talking a recreation center. And when we originally proposed it, we talked about building this facility in phases. And the very first phase that we would build is the community center portion. Because when we did the research, what did we hear from our community that we really needed? And we needed area for community recreation. That does not include pools. 70% of the people that we heard from said the top priority for the town of Superior was community recreation. The next highest on the list was pool. And they said the same thing about the way we spent the money. And if you look at what we're building, if the facility happens at the sports stable, the way it's planned right now, the majority of the money that's going to be tied up is going to be tied up in that pool. It's going to be tied up in indoor aquatics, which was second on the priorities. 69% of the community wanted indoor recreation. And that does not include recreation. That was the most important place.
It doesn't
Hey,
include fitness? Or-
It's broad.
Yeah,
It just
okay.
said indoor recreation. So it would include recreation. But what we're getting ready to focus most of this on is a pool. The secondary is a weight room, because then indoor recreation broke down, and weight room, workout room, was within the indoor recreation component. So this is where the piece at the sports stable concerns me, if we don't have that unified commitment for the rest of the facility. And maybe that's going to happen in the civic space, maybe it's not. My belief is, if the sports stable thing happens, the civic space is going out the door, because we're going to say, oh, we don't have any money to do it.
Well, it will be
Yeah, but
for a number of years. I mean, I think that is an absolute reality, is that will be it for, until the other is
But,
built.
so
If
we'll
it's-
be answering not the top priority of our residents, which was indoor recreation facilities.
I think it is.
I think it is, though.
But I don't think it is.
Well, because, you know, if you talk, this, the way this survey was done was kind of confusing, you know, for people
It
about
was
what, you know,
confusing.
it was very confusing, so that's one thing we had to keep in mind. But it was clear that pool, which got added kind of at the end, was secondary, and then the weight room, which was surprising to me that came up so high, well, there is a weight room at Impact Sports. So, you know, we then look at, and then after that, I think there was like yoga, or what was the other kind of stuff? What was the fourth one in there? Can you say? Well, it doesn't matter.
Because that was a subset within.
Yeah, that was a subset in the civic space, I think, in the
Within the
civic
recreation
space.
facilities.
Ability to work, you know, have classes and things like that. But for me, and I like to talk about these separately, you know, I'd like to have them, the civic community space, which we've committed to do something on in downtown Superior. I don't want that, I would, like Mark said, as a separate item, because, and then rec space as another separate discussion item. It's amazing to me, just this morning at Historical Committee, and this week, 4 people have asked me, well, are you building the $11 million recreation center, $11 million recreation center for town of Superior? And I said, we're discussing how we might partner with 2 other businesses in town to create expanded rec facilities. And then they go, oh, but I thought it was going to be like a mini Lakeshore, or now Lifetime Fitness, or I thought it was, well, isn't it going to be like Louisville? You know, and so everyone has this impression of this small space, which expands services that already exist in 2 businesses, into what we've also talked about as a recreation center, a full recreation center with a pool. That would be like 3 times as much money. So the first thing that we need to do is define more clearly, when we talk about a priority for rec space in 2018, the size and the cost and what might be in that rec space. And because right now there's difference of opinion about the people out there based on articles have been in the paper, Boulder Camera, and how we've talked about it, that they think it's a full-blown rec center akin to a mini Lakeshore. And that's a perception. I'm not saying that it's right, it's just a perception out there. So now let's go back, and then we talk about expanding these 2 businesses, their abilities, as well as creating some new for us. Well, what are we creating that's new? We're proposing to possibly participate in the creation of a small splash pool with a little lazy river around it, which would be used by families, usually of smaller children, and some lanes of lap lanes, but not a competitive aquatic center as defined or described in the Boulder Camera. So people also have that perception that they think that we're going to create a indoor recreation swimming pool where you can have meets and things like that. So then we go back to what Sandy was saying, and this is my concern, is of the 11 million, how much of that is associated with building and maintaining that pool area, which isn't a aquatic center, it's a splash area. And then we need to decide, is that a good use of $5 to $6 million? You know, I'm not saying yes or no, I'm just asking the question. We haven't had this discussion. We sound like as if we're going forward with this, when I don't feel that we've had the complete discussion yet, whether it's a good use of multi-millions of dollars to create a small splash pool and a few lap lanes, for swimming.
I don't think that accurately reflects what the last discussion was about what the pool is going to look like.
It's not a competitive aquatic center. We will not
I mean,
have
we can have
competition.
Patrick come up here, but I mean, you know, when.
But it will not
when
have
we had-
competition in
But
there.
that was because Luke had a conversation with
With
somebody
somebody else,
from
and he didn't
USA
tell us
Swimming.
until the
We haven't
end.
seen a new design. I mean, what we
But
talked
we
about
haven't
is.
seen that yet.
We
Right,
haven't
we
seen
haven't
it.
seen a new design, so like, you know, we can't necessarily disparage what the.
I'm not disparaging, I'm saying to you, we haven't had the decision and the discussion about is multi-millions of dollars worth what we have seen. I've only seen a few lanes, which is not a professional aquatics or a competitive aquatics pool, can't have meets in there. And so I'm just stating the facts as I know them today, and we haven't made that decision yet, whether the town should spend $6 million to create a pool area that's not an aquatic center, which is what the perception is right now.
Well, and the priority that we heard from our residents, when you compared the aquatics facility, 11% of them said the highest priority was a leisure pool with lap lanes. 3 or 5% said a competitive pool. And yet we're worrying about focusing on a competitive pool, but that's not what our residents wanted.
Well, what
Our
we have is what
residents-
the other thing, the leisure pool, the design so far has shown the leisure pool plus of some lap lanes.
Yeah,
There isn't
I mean, that was
yeah.
the original plan, but then Luke came in and talked about putting USA Swimming coming up and putting in 8 lanes and all this. But that's what Luke wants. That is not what our residents wanted. Our residents wanted a leisure pool with lap lanes.
Yeah.
And so, you know, that's where I'm sitting here going, but it wasn't even the top priority. The top priority, which indoor facility should be the highest priority to add or approve, very top thing was the library. Very top thing. The next thing was the weight fitness room, and then a leisure pool with lap lanes. So what worries me is that we're ignoring what we heard. Now, we can't build a library, but if we go toward building something because we've heard from a small group of people, as opposed to what we heard from our residents who responded in the survey, we can't build the library right now, but we need to be able to address both and say, okay, if we're going to build this pool, we also have it in our plan that we are going to address the other issues down the road. And I fear we're going to lose that because all we're going to think about is that
Can I
one
ask a
facility.
point for clarification? Let's just say we were building a library, right? We had the means to build a library. Would you want to build a library in this box?
No, the Rex,
Absolutely not.
in between
In the
Boulder
sports
Valley House and
stadium? No
Impact?
way.
Oh, no, there's not
Okay.
enough room there.
And I'm not
Right.
saying
And-
that we should. What I'm saying is, you can't go after one without also having a commitment and a plan for
Well,
the
Mark,
second.
Right, but this goes to Clint's point. This is
If they
phase
wanna
one,
build it,
right? We're
that's
dealing
fine.
with.
Well, is it better to do nothing?
Yes.
Because
Right, that's the other option. is
Hey,
do not.
Clint, let me,
see, this is what's so frustrating, is
Yeah.
that we put all this effort into trying to get things done, and then we end up talking ourselves out of it because, well, what
Well,
if this
okay.
doesn't come?
Except
Okay.
for it's because somebody
Let's-
went down the road without us having a plan of how we wanted to attack this.
Right.
So somebody goes out
Right.
and starts exploring something without saying to everybody, hey guys, is this the priority we should be focusing on?
That's not, I don't think that's a very fair characterization. It was an idea, and then Chris took it to the board saying, before I go too much further, I want to let you guys know.
Yeah.
We staged it a few weeks ago, great, go to the next stage. Staff and Luke and others did a nice job bringing it back to us last week. Okay, great, now we're directionally supportive. The majority of us were directionally supportive, go to the next stage. Nobody's writing checks yet, and this has been a pretty staged process. It initiated with just a good idea and a conversation, not unlike your idea of that initiated with your conversation about it. Sometimes you get a spark and then you feed the flame a little
But
bit.
And I appreciate the out-of-the-box thinking,
Right.
because, frankly, this is a way for us to potentially build something, and one of the financing options was, we don't come out of pocket anything, above like $500,000. That was just one of the financing
Right.
options. And I think that it's great to just look at all the possibilities of delivering amenities that residents in our town want,
I
right?
am-
And whether that's ultimately where we go and what
But
we
at
end
what
up doing.
cost? We
Of
haven't had
course,
the discussion about the
everything's at what
cost.
cost, but
We've
right-
only discussed about what we would do and that we would pay for it. But we haven't had the discussion, is this pool area on the first floor of value to us from a financial perspective? Not based on wants, but based on the value, financial fiduciary responsibility to the town. Does this make good sense to spend, I think, over half of that $11 million associated just with the pool? And, well, maybe more, it's probably 2/3 of that $11 million cost. And we're sitting here talking about trying to get $10 million to build a civic community space, and here, which would be much bigger than what we're now talking about spending, possibility of spending $11 million for primarily this leisure pool and a few lap lanes, not a competitive aquatic center as defined in the documents. So I'm just talking about the cost. I'm not talking about not doing it. And when it was first presented, should we talk about partnering with Impact Sports and Boulder Valley Ice to possibly work with them to build out that facilities in that square, which we have a picture of built out, but in the lobby out here, it looks beautiful. I'd like to see it built out like that as FDP. I pointed that out to you when you came in today. And so then now for us to come back, I like the idea of partnering with them. Let them build it out, and instead of we lease out 20% to them, let them lease out 20% to us.
Let's go back to the beginning, though.
Which is
here.
where I was at the last meeting, figure out different financial, because the
But
financial.
all of that is going to be, we need to make the decision first as to whether or not we want to actually go forward with, seeing further designs and building some sort of, rec component here. And then the financing is going to be part of the ultimate decision. But, we're going to need to see what we're paying for before we decide to pay for it, right?
Mark, the question, though, fundamentally, and we're ignoring it entirely, is what unmet need or desire that has significant community agreement are we trying to meet here? And ultimately, when we put this significant amount of money into yet more sports and fitness, right? In a community where there are so many logical options and they're heavily used by our community. Our community is we have a large number of members to Louisville, Haddam to Lakeshore. I just signed up for Lifetime again, and they've got a lot of Superior residents already signed up to Lifetime. There are yoga clinics, there are smaller programs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I sat here since the last meeting trying to assess why I'm so disturbed by this whole thing. And we are focusing, going down this path. We, in my opinion, are focusing our time, effort, and financial resources on something that really doesn't move us very far down the pike along the line of amenities that people as a group wanted. Sandy is correct. It's totally tiny, that percentage that wants the competitive pool, right? And so I don't know why we feel compelled to meet that. This board has vacillated numerous times when we've had the flyers in here going, well, we're hearing you, but that's not our problem, right? Mm-hmm. And yet, we're focusing on that element of need/desire. Rita's good at saying it's not a need, it's a desire, and I happen to agree with that. That largely you can meet some other way very effectively here. It's like broadband. We've got that largely satisfied. Now, our residents may want or desire fitness cheap, and they may desire, a sports programming cheaper than it's available out there, but largely they've got all those options available to them. What they don't have available to them, what we don't have available to us as community is the community gathering spaces, the library aspect, not its own standalone library aspect, the non-fitness and the non-sports orientation. So for those of us who value that, why are we thinking about spending $11 million doing something we already can have satisfied, right? And then secondly, couldn't agree more, and this was the thing I tried to introduce at the end of the conversation, I'm not really interested in having a real estate position in a building that has two private partners. They can go bankrupt at any time. We then would own that little tower element. So if we go down this pike, if the majority goes down this pike, and I would say this is such a monumental thing for this town, that to be satisfied with a 4-3 split on the board, it's unsatisfying to me to go there. I would hope that we could actually, on something this monumental for this town, agree that we're going in the correct direction, and then ultimately we are just sliding around this idea of, are we going to send this out in a referendum to where our voters can actually vote on it? Or are we going to be satisfied with making this decision here and somehow, where I draw the line in the sand is the one line item in the cover memo last meeting where we would sacrifice some of the road maintenance projects to be able to move this forward faster. And I'm not happy
We have
with
an
that.
alternative to that too.
Yeah, but I mean, that was what was in that memo.
I know.
And half of us
There's other
were
options.
okay with that. I'm here to say I am totally unokay with that. So I would ask you guys who are enthusiastic about this, what is it that you see this facility having that is really important to the town of Superior,
So-
that can't be met otherwise?
So one of the things that I take issue with what you said, though, is the notion that, some of us on the board value things differently. I think everybody here on the board values civic space. This is a question of prioritization, and we have the opportunity to build something that we otherwise would not, and meet needs of the community that are currently unmet. And if we can put
But you have to
something.
tell me what those
What's
are.
the
What-
unmet need?
What's the unmet need? What do you think this is going to
What's
provide?
the unmet need? As Corbett Honinger said at ProStack the other night, if we were to build a pool over here, or we were to build enhanced workout facilities, he's not going there. He's going to Lakeshore because it's closer to his house. So if the reason we're building all this, which is a part of all this, is, we wanted it within our town limits so that it would be closer for our folks, he says, I'm going to Lifetime because I can get the pool and I can get the fitness equipment and I can get enhanced things. So, but he says, this isn't answering what we wanted, which was the community center aspect. This is not going to solve that problem. It's okay if the sports stable builds it. He says, I don't even have an issue if we say in some ways we might subsidize our residents who want to go there.
So this isn't an either-or proposition. We're not saying let's build this and not build a
But
library,
it's
not
not an
build any
unmet
civics.
need.
I disagree with that. So, we.
It's going after limited
No, so.
funds. We have limited
have-
resources.
Yeah, of course, but, Sandy, when you were running for trustee, at Chili Fest, you had that board there where people were putting, little stickies on all their priorities. And by far, the top priority was that people wanted a rec center.
They wanted a
Yeah.
community
Yeah.
center.
So.
And that's the conversation
Yeah,
I
and-
had,
okay.
not that they
Right.
wanted a pool.
Okay, and so.
Or more.
Yeah, and to some,
more
and
sports
to
things.
some, a nice facility, a nice rec facility with an indoor pool, with workout rooms, with yoga classes, with spin classes, with meeting space for birthday parties and things like that, is a community center because people make friends when they're working out, they're making friends when they're going to the gym, when they're swimming. Things like that are very important to a large number of our community. I'm not saying that necessarily cuts against doing civic space, but by doing a partnership here with Sports Stable and Impact, obviously we need to see what the plans are. I want, so I'm coming back to, what does success look like in 2018? So I want to see revised plans from Impact and Sports Stable showing, a larger pool, showing something that's going to meet the needs of families who have, young kids who want to swim indoors, and then, the workout space, the yoga classes, the spinning rooms, things like that, something that works in that space. That to me is success. The nice thing about doing it this way is that it is then freeing up, $10 million that otherwise could be, potentially used for other things in connection with the TIF.
How so?
But it's not, because we're spending $11 million over a certain amount of years.
No, but
If we
none of the
were-
TIF funds are going into this deal.
No, I know,
But it's still.
it's still
hard-
costing
good hard
the
cash.
town money.
Wait a minute, and we don't know that,
We don't know what.
that none of the TIF funds are going into this deal. There's-
Well, the ranch is not a party to this
I
agreement.
understand, but there
Yeah.
is an option that we can say that in order to meet this civic space need, we would like to use X millions of dollars for our contribution to this. I don't know if they, I think, yes, it's not officially part of the ranch, it's not part of the development agreement, but
But that totally diminishes the possibility of ever having.
But Kevin's
standalone
right.
civic
Kevin's
center.
right. It
You
could be part of
could,
the
you
money.
could make
Yeah.
that decision.
right, it's just one of those, it's something that is so,
It's a
again, I
scenario.
like the way that we have staged this thinking. I do think that, to me, and I recognize that I probably, I wouldn't, I don't go, if I was choosing a community center, I wouldn't go to a community center personally to play cards or play chess or to meet people. What would gather me to that community center would be more recreation. That's me personally, and that's just who I am. But I do think that we have the opportunity to also build a relatively small box and have a community center with a barber shop and a coffee shop and meeting space. And that's what that building has.
Wait, no,
That building has those other businesses.
Well, the barber shop, I mean, well, so here's the thing. You
That's
were
what the building
defining,
has.
I know, but what you were defining, Mark, okay, let me start with, I'm not opposed with partnering with the two businesses already exist there to help them build out what they've already committed to build. But we keep talking about that the town of Superior would build a building
Do I
and
need to
allow.
get the picture in here?
Yeah,
so
yeah, do I need to get the
everybody can see
picture?
it?
So let's, and that's what you both were saying, and that's how it started. Are we interested in having further discussions with Impact Sports and Sports Stable about partnering with them? I'm not opposed to that. What I'm opposed for us to automatically assume and allow them to assume that we're going to build the building for them to expand their businesses into that space.
I don't think anybody said that.
Yes, we did.
that's
$11
the
million
plan.
paid for by the town over time, that we would build an $11 million building, the town would pay for it. The town would manage it, the Parks and Rec Department would have to provide people in the pool, and all that kind of stuff. So yes, that's what we're discussing here. I think we have to be careful about that. We need to discuss, and which you started with, which I liked, what could be built there that fits there. Not talking first about what are we going to build there, but what could be, and how could we talk with Impact Sports and Sports Stable to come up with something that fits there, and how might we partner with them? Instead of again, Kevin was saying that we would lease out 20% to them. No, I think it needs to be the other way around.
It does, I think it goes both ways, was the point I was making.
Not both ways. We don't own the building. They have to own the building. It's their building. It's not our building. It's always been their building. The picture's out on the wall, like I said.
Right, but all of that, to me, these are, they're material deal points, but this is part of a negotiation.
But here's
to
the
be-
thing, what
to
will
be-
change significantly.
To be agreed upon in the future, but ultimately.
No, because they come in here, I'm going to stop you, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but they come in here thinking we are already, as a town, in agreement that we want to participate with them. We will pay for, they will get the financing, but we will pay for that financing and own the building after the time of 20 or 25 years. And so they're under.
But I think we disabused them of that assumption at the last meeting where we said,
Okay.
listen, we're
so.
not committing to anything here. We're just
But the
spitballing issues.
newspaper article the next
Well,
day was different.
They
But
disabused
we
that.
didn't, we haven't signed any agreement, we haven't committed to anything. Right now, we're just talking about how do we do this in a way that works for both parties?
How
And-
might we do this
Right.
that would work
Yeah,
for both
and
parties?
it might not, but the
And the
question
real
here
question
is
should be-
prioritization in terms of, what do we want to do in 2018? Do we want to move further down the road on this discussion or do we not? And-
Why would-
Okay, and I'm saying yes to that, but no to what I heard earlier was, do we want to move down the road on the $11 million building, built in that space there between them? We haven't made that decision yet. We have made the decision, and I believe we said that at the end, as you said, we disabused what they thought, they being the two business owners. Now we've said, would you, because I said that to Ryland, who sat right there, would you build the pool and the lap lanes if it's on your dime? Or 10 million or $11 million? If that's true, then bring it on. Bring it forth. Show us, the town, what you want to build for your space and what makes sense for your business. Not what, he says, well, we're trying to answer your town's requirements. I said, no, this is the wrong way to do this discussion. You own the business, you own the land, you two need to come to us and say, this would be what would work best for us. This is the best building and the amenities within the building, I told Ryland, that you, Ryland, think you could build up to 2,000 members, the fastest. So I think that, for me, the priority here, when we say possible rec center space as a partnership with Impact Sports and Boulder Valley Ice, is, I think that could be, I am okay with that as a priority. But not a priority that says we, the town, need to go forward to build an $11 million building. I want them to come back and say, how could we work? And that's a big difference from where we started this discussion 45 minutes ago.
Ultimately, it is on them to
Right.
prove to us what value added any partnership can provide to us towards those objectives that Sandy summarized there, towards what our residents have highly prioritized. It's the value added to us of this partnership. If this partnership doesn't move us further down the pike on what our residents highly prioritize, we shouldn't do it.
And $11 million at the financing, which I know we're not going to do that financing that they proposed, but that wasn't a good deal for the town. So now we have to come back, and pay something that's more realistic, and, or more reasonable for what's in the best interest of the
Well, all of
town.
the financial things were less than desirable. The
Right.
8% ROI, the
Yeah.
5.5%, the
Yeah, right.
11 million.
Okay, so
Um,
let's let them come back to us with staff, get a whole new set of options, and
Well, that's why this is a separate item for me from civic space, and I'm with Mark on that. We can't muddy this up. What might be built in that space between those two buildings can't be muddied up with the civic community space that we still want to build for, and have committed to build in the town
Well,
center.
yeah, but I disagree from the perspective of how do you we have finite resources.
Well, that's, the
Right.
financing of it is part of the
No, we have
discussion.
finite resources of
Yeah.
every kind.
Yeah.
Staff
in-
time,
in the-
everything. How do we say we're going to keep rec center in its own, and I call it sports and fitness center, in its own silo, and the non-sports and fitness
Community. civic
over
space.
here in this silo, when in fact they're all drawing from the same set of resources, whether those resources are money, staff time, effort, trustee time, or whatever. To me, we have to keep our eyes open that we cannot probably afford full scale on both. So where do we meet in the middle? So that's why I see them as having to be addressed together.
Well, we have to make a decision soon whether we're moving forward with a partnership with Impact Sports and Boulder Valley Ice.
But
on
it can't
this.
be done in isolation, in my opinion.
And part of that decision has to include the financing and use of resources across all the projects available to us. But that decision is a decision that has to be made. You know, it's not a decision it's not either or, like you said, Mark. It's not a decision, I'm agreeing with you. It's not either do this or do this. It's how do we do it all, or as much as possible. And, but we have to make a decision. I think we owe everybody a decision on how to proceed, or if we proceed, with that rec fitness space between those two businesses that are already operating in the downtown. That's a decision point, and I think that needs to be a priority. We need to make that decision instead of continue to discuss it.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right, we're good to move on to next item. And we're just a check-in here, we're an hour and a half left. And we're moving through the priorities. We've still got a couple we want to talk about. Development, commercial core, thoughts, comments on that?
I just had a quick question when we talk about that. How does the Northwest Superior, because we haven't really talked about that at all, and I want to make sure that Northwest Superior work remains important. So, and we haven't even put that on the list anywhere. So if we are talking about
It's in
On
development
Mark's
of it.
list, it's.
it's on your list, but it's not within, and to me, that is, it's not just Superior Town Center, it's this whole, it's the whole band that goes across here.
I
So
actually
don't want us
think
to
Northwest
lose.
area is outside the town center and the rest of the.
too.
Yeah, because it's a high priority for me as well. And I want
I'm
us to
just
get
saying,
to-
I don't want us to talk
Yeah,
about
yeah.
one and not talk about the other,
Yeah.
so.
So it's on Monday's agenda for discussion.
Presentation.
But I mean, on this 2018, it's here.
Who's
It's
presenting
this
that?
last bullet.
Planning Commission and Clarion.
It's Clarion Doak,
Yeah.
okay.
Okay, so we'll talk about, as we move through this list,
I just don't want it to be
circle back
forgotten.
that. Yep.
Well, but what you were asking, the development in the commercial core, get commercial core started in downtown Superior, Main Street commercial concepts of demonstrable progress by developer. Well, I can't quibble with any of that, but I don't make that, it doesn't make my list of top priorities. It should be their top priority. And this is where I get confused as to what we can really force them to do. We can articulate that.
Yeah, it goes back to your comment earlier about we can have our ideas, but they have their own ideas and priorities. I think it doesn't hurt to have our list of priorities. It puts it out there that this is a focus of ours. We would like to help to the extent that we can. I don't think there's any harm in doing that. I think if anything, it just shows that, yeah, we as a board are focused on this and would like to see this as well. But
I agree with that, but I don't want to spend any time of our remaining hour and a half.
I don't think we
I mean-
need to. We just
Yeah,
say
my
that.
only comment is, how much can we control that? So if we put it on there, how do we put it on in such a way that says, it's something we're concerned about, but literally, we have no control
But I don't
over
know,
it?
I think
We
we
do have control.
I mean, I'll go back to that example. We've asked the developer, help us help you. What can we do? The developer said the number one thing that my sub-developers want is signage. Help me with the signage. We said, no, go home.
Well, I don't
We
know
said
that
come
that's,
back.
no, we said,
We said no.
we
said
said
no
no
to
for a
47
47-foot
Right on.
honking 24 by 24.
I'm not saying that was the wrong
building.
answer.
Yeah.
but we said no, you know.
They're coming back on the
They're gonna
side.
come
Let's see what they come, so
They're
that's
gonna come
well,
back.
that's why I think it's, you know, it is a priority for us to, the most important thing for me is to get rid of the dirt pile
Yeah.
and to have a, you know, a place where the community can work and eat right downtown. Wouldn't that be great?
What does
Right?
somebody
Can we
mean
say
by
something like
commercial?
support efforts by the developer or something like, I just don't want it to make it look like we're the ones who are controlling what happens over
Well, just,
there.
my thing is, you know, every time that Jenks or anybody from the ranch or the developer's gonna be here, you know, what do you need from us?
And we've got
Not-
to define
right.
commercial.
Big sign.
Commercial has its
So that's so
own,
far, that's the only thing they've ever asked for.
has its own separate designation. I mean, are we talking about retail? Are we talking restaurants? Are we talking office? Are we talking?
All
Yes,
the above.
yes, yes,
Whatever.
yeah. all
So
of
if
them.
we mean the whole thing, we got to make sure that how we use that word commercial, meaning non-residential, right? It sounds like. So that in fact, Bill and Ranch are interpreting it the same. They don't have a narrower band in their brain for what commercial means. So develop non-residential core might be the better way to.
Or commercial and retail, but either way.
The only way you're going to actually be able to put any oomph against it is if you actually state, if we state it as a target or a goal for ourselves, and then we figure out how we can actually impact it. Instead of saying, we'll help you in any way you desire. Well, that, I think we need to state this very thing. We want to see Main Street commercial concepts and/or demonstrable progress on the development. And then we say, okay, that's our goal. How do we help you accomplish that for us? And we can, I can think of a handful of things that we could be doing with them to do that. Now, I don't think there's anything wrong with putting that down as a goal. That's our goal.
Yep.
We want, and the first Friday, the last one we were at, I'm telling you, 5 people asked that question. When are we going to be able to shop and eat along Main Street?
And I think that's a topic for our discussion on Monday with
Right.
Bill, a large part of it. You know, again, coming back to like, this is one of those aspirational goals because there's nothing that we can do to force somebody to build something and spend their own money developing something. Certainly we can encourage them and ask, oh, pretty please, it would be nice to have this commercial core started in downtown Superior. But I look at this like, how do we measure success, right? Again, the end of this year, if we've considered and approved an FDP for commercial development, I mean, I would be ecstatic. And
Right.
so,
Right.
I mean, that would just be great.
Right, right. And I don't think there's anything wrong with stating that as a goal for
Yeah,
ourselves.
I'm cool with the Main Street commercial for demonstrable progress by developer.
Right, right, right.
Because
right.
that's not really us.
Right, right. And we'll do, okay,
Okay.
done? Next?
All right, next is development, other conveyed parcel, consider development plan, see construction, great Drake intent.
We got that.
So large part of that is done.
Yeah.
We just haven't seen construction.
Yeah.
but-
Right. Okay. But it's on the list of potential priorities, but that's not really
No.
I'm not hearing
My,
that's
um,
I think that was my susuggestion, and that was actually suggested before the meeting where we actually approved.
Okay, got it.
So this was
Okay.
suggested months ago.
Right.
Got it.
Yeah, right, right.
Okay. Address commercial vacancies in marketplace and elsewhere.
That's ongoing, should,
Well, could that be part of the Northwest area planning? Because it encompasses marketplace.
And there's a lot in that, in the material that is in our packet, there's a
Right.
good bit about further market studies, and I would
And
just-
even the ULI stuff that we've already
Yes.
done, all of that.
I would just want to make sure that all that's being done kind of in consideration of Brixmor, because it's kind of like we had the discussion over here about, well, we've got our goals about what we think, but they've got their own things. Brixmor is the entity over there, and we can have all of our ideas and theories we want, but at the end of the day, that's their show.
Right.
And so I just want to make sure that we're not spending a lot of consulting dollars and effort and everything else, only to have them say, hey, great, thanks for doing that, but it really doesn't jive with what we're doing. But I think that's what, when we go to Las Vegas on
Yeah.
annual trip to have our check-in with ownership. That's, those are the kind of things we're talking about. And one of the things that I've seen them in since year one that I went and more recently, they seem to be warming more to the idea of residential in retail centers. Not only, I mean, this is a nationwide
Right.
trend, and you read about this more and more on a nationwide basis. And so the first year was like, nope, that's not our thing, we don't do that. And then all of a sudden, it's
Well, you
changed.
see that, like the Westminster Mall that got tore down.
Yes.
Across, whatever
Yes.
it's called over there.
And-
And now the first things that are going up around JCPenney are homes.
Right.
Apartments or condos. So you're right, you're seeing the redevelopment happen of the formal commercial
Yes.
or market. Now, the reason why this Northwest area planning that includes the marketplace is important as we think about this is that, I just talked with Matt before we came in here, Dr. Cog is asking for every community to provide for their planning out through 2040, all the variable parcels that are left in towns and, and open space versus, because Dr. Cog has to report for the Denver MOP, Metropolitan Planning Organization, what's happening with urban versus suburban versus open space out through 2040. And so we're presenting what we think is going to happen and what spaces we have available for development and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But the other thing that came up, which we saw, RTD has defined our bus rapid transit land here as great for transit-oriented development, which include residential, which we've talked about in the past, and we thought we had somebody who might want to go forward as a developer. So if they and the board of RTD have already defined our area, I think we need to get involved to make sure we're defining it similarly with what they're thinking and press them on how they could help us get that developed. And so that's where this development of the marketplace, or Northwest area planning all come together, and I think we have a direct impact on the marketplace from that particular point of the RTD space, the land that's there.
And then that would certainly, I mean, obviously, if they did something transit-oriented development, that could be a game changer. If the ULI study, that also could be a game changer. I think this was one of my suggestions initially, and my thinking behind this is, we as a town are so lucky that we have the retailers that we have, right? And we're a destination, right? People travel from Boulder and Broomfield and Louisville to shop here, right? We've got a Target, we've got a Costco, we've got a great liquor store, we've got a Whole Foods, we've got
Expanding smokehouse.
Now we've got an Ethan Allen. That's coming. And these are the sort of opportunities. Towns would kill for these types of retailers, right? We've got the Drake construction, and we've got all these opportunities that really set us apart from a lot of other towns. Let's not just rest on our laurels here. Let's see how we can capitalize on it. Like, I think with furniture stores in general, we talked about this when the Ethan Allen FDP came through. They tend to congregate together, kind of like how car dealerships do, because people go shopping for cars. They don't necessarily know if they want a Honda or a Toyota, so they go down down 104th and go to all the
They're
buildings.
all on
Right.
County Line Road.
Right, exactly,
Because
yeah.
we're looking for furniture.
Right, so people go furniture
nobody
shopping,
drives, we
and
don't.
so they all go to this area. So, is this an opportunity for us to just, spend the limited resources that we're using on our consultants in a targeted way? And, so I talked to some people and they say, it'd be great if we had like a Bed Bath, right? Like there's not a Bed Bath
Right.
in this area. So let's reach out to these types of retailers that could fill vacancies that are in the place, and just target, be proactive, be focused in terms of how we're going out there and trying to lure people to come and invest in our town.
So we'll have that presentation on Monday. This Northwest Area Plan cannot, I read the coverage in the paper, it cannot be NIMBY-oriented and simply the residential aspect of existing properties and, congestion on, or excess traffic on Coal Creek Drive and all that kind of stuff. I like, Rita, what you said, that RTD or TOD thing there. like what you said, this is back in the day when I'm all confused, Matt, when did Oz do that PD for what eventually became the town center in what year?
2012.
Okay, so back in the day, when we were having to work as a board through what are your objectives here, and my objective, and I think a lot of people agreed with it, is both sides of McCaslin have to thrive. Whatever ends up happening in the town center cannot rob the vibrancy of this side of McCaslin. Both have to thrive. They can have distinct auras and all that kind of
Characteristics,
stuff and serve
character.
different purposes and all, but we don't do anything if we rob Peter to pay Paul. So, to me, what the Northwest Superior thing does, that's why, Sandy, my concept was that it was distinct from the town center. That's one thing. And this is, how do we make this area here thrive? And hopefully with some creativity and making it really unique. I love your idea, because literally, we've got all 3 kids through college now, and we're actually buying new furniture. And
Oh, now everybody's going to move in just because you've got money to spend.
we are down in County Line Road every weekend, because that's where the furniture stores we like are.
Yeah.
And we haven't even gone to IKEA, because,
Oh, you don't need to go there.
Anyway.
They were supposed to come here and then they didn't. But anyway,
They're coming to Brookfield.
yeah, we won't go there.
Sports Authority,
So,
It's a nice
but I
place
think
for
that,
furniture store.
you know, just like Ethan Allen, we tried for years to get them to build on their land that they own there. But guess what? We didn't just get lucky, because luck is preparation and opportunity coming together. So the opportunity, we were prepared, and the opportunity was that they got a new director of marketing or VP of marketing that came in and said, oh my God, all of our customers are from here. Why would we be down there?
Right.
And so we need to be prepared for the next opportunity and actually push toward that opportunity. And, because I don't want to just wait around and get lucky. You know, so I think we need to be prepared to get lucky. And then so,
we
you
need
know.
to make our own.
You've all been, you know, okay,
Make
no, we
your
won't go
own
there. But no, we need to prepare for this and present the opportunity for people to come here and be able to get something going.
So I guess like in terms of, you know, how do we make this like measurable and deliverable? Like I think when we talk to the consultant, you know, we need to have an idea as to, okay, tell us who you're going to talk to, and you know, tell us about, you know, what industries you're looking at. Are you looking at furniture? Are you looking at, you know, whatever, and you know, what's your game plan? Because I think, you know, part of the frustration here is we want to see results, but we don't know necessarily what's being done, if anything's being done.
I don't even know if
So-
that's the purpose of Monday's meeting. I haven't read my paper.
Right, so, you know.
Oh, I don't
you
think
know,
you're talking about that consultant.
Yeah.
You're talking about our other.
Right.
Katie?
Yeah.
Right, so what I would like to see in terms of, you know, economic development consultants is a game plan, right?
Right.
Is this is how I'm gonna go about doing my best to attract businesses to locate in Superior, and these are the types of businesses that I'm going after. Do you have any other suggestions? And, you know, I would just like to have that information, because at least then we know what they're doing rather than just, you know, shooting blindly and casting.
So why don't we write that? as a-
I think you've got the
as
real
right.
point there. I don't need a report on what the market environment is. I want to know, what are we doing?
All right, so why don't we write that?
What's our
as-
plan?
Why don't we make that a priority? You just say, you know, we expect from staff, and we will support, you know, the development of a commercial development marketing strategy.
Yeah.
So, okay, so we're on this development other,
Right.
but we're coalescing on Northwest's small
Correct.
area planning. That's one of my top 2018. Are we agreed it's a top priority, and that the components would include this? Do you see what?
Sure.
Martha?
I am in
Okay,
agreement with that.
Yeah, I
I'm in
think so, but I
agreement.
want to, I'm looking forward to the readout. I mean, I don't know what's in the plan, you know, if the plan says, you know, NIMBY, you know, it's a NIMBY type plan, then I'm not going to be supportive of it. So
Well,
we agree
but
with
we
that.
have to modify it. We're in control.
Right.
Not for Monday night you're talking about?
I don't know what-
necessarily. Yeah,
I
that's
haven't
just
looked.
paying, that's,
Picking a consultant.
that's hiring a consultant to go further and do more work. So we have to talk about that Monday night. There's some holes in that contract. I'm not sure what they're going to do for us, but, you know, I would like to understand better when we get to that Monday night. You know, how they get, I know the amount they get paid, and there's phases and stages, but it doesn't
Well, I
define.
think that'll come out.
Yeah, so there's a lot of discussion, but that's not the plan we're talking about. I don't think that we're
Yeah,
talking
but I
about.
mean, I agree with what
Yeah.
Kevin's suggestion was, like, as just one of our priorities, have our economic development consultant.
Right.
Deliver to us a plan of, you know, how they're gonna go about targeting specific areas of the marketplace and specific retailers in
Yeah,
general.
and I'd like to see it before Vegas, and I personally would like to go to, I don't know if my schedule will permit, but, you know, I'd like to see it before Vegas so we could try to execute on it at that conference.
And I also don't think that it necessarily needs to be, you know, marketplace specific, you know,
No.
it's Superior specific.
Right.
Because you're
Yeah.
exactly right. If suddenly we
Because we do
decided
have
that
other
we're trying to
areas.
create a, you know, enclave of high-end furniture stores, you know, great. That sounds like, we've just defined a strategy in a 5-minute conversation, and that becomes the focus of, you know, we're gonna make sure that Clint or whoever's there has the opportunity to meet with the executives from these 15 furniture stores. And, you know, these talking points
And
are
Katie
delivered.
could have well prepared in advance, or whoever whoever is the consultant.
Yeah.
In advance, what kind of saturation there is in this
Right.
region, et cetera,
Right.
et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
But so in Northwest Small Area Planning as a 2018 priority, that's in there? The BRTTOD things in
The
there?
marketplace is in there, because that's
Right.
part of that, yeah.
And then.
And marketplace encompasses the BRT.
There are all those elements, you know, original town as a historic district.
Mhm.
You know, the whole goal for me is thrive. How do we
Oh, and I'm
make this
careful, that's a
area
builder.
thrive and vibrance and complement town center?
Yeah.
You know, and that kind of thing. So it's a big priority.
Okay, so it's in. Are we done?
All right.
With that,
I think we've touched on
I
most
think
of
we've-
these other
we've-
bullets here. So are we good for, go down to Jefferson Parkway?
Yeah, did we say we're gonna leave transportation in? I can't remember, we started with that. And then we were gonna include Jefferson Parkway in other discussions.
well, let me just talk about 2018 and its significance for JP and significance for Rocky Flats. Okay, so on this long-term proposal, you know, which is the raison d'etre for Jefferson Parkway Public Highway Authority, by the end of December 2018, they've got to commit. And they have to, in my read of things, Matt, correct me on any of this detail, they've got to commit and have a contractor in place to proceed on the construction of Jefferson Parkway. So December 2018 is a huge date. We have not, since this board's been seated, and haven't really for the last several years of the last board, really talked as a board about the potential implications on the town of Superior of Jefferson Parkway. Right now, West Connect is in the process of having these regional meetings on their transportation things, which explicitly excluded JP, right? So, you know, it's 93, it's 470, et cetera, et cetera. But this is a make it or break it year for Jefferson Parkway in terms of either their ability to proceed. The next deadline is, I believe, the end of 2020. If they cannot meet this measurement here, they have to have it completed, Jefferson Parkway completed by December of 2020 to qualify for this $100 million, right?
Yeah.
40 and $60 million. So this is a really critical year in Jefferson Parkway. So at a minimum, this new, you know, the board as newly constituted after the 2016 election needs to discuss Jefferson Parkway. Are we going to have an opinion on that? Are we going to be active in all of this, et cetera, et cetera? So Jefferson Parkway is tangentially involved with Rocky Flats because that eastern perimeter is on the right-of-way at Rocky Flats, right? So there will be, in my opinion, a significant amount of public outcry as Jefferson Parkway plans go forth as to whether or not that eastern corridor is unearthed, because that is a dirty corridor. And so there will be a lot of public input and public protest on some of that. So we would, if we likewise are concerned for this community about unearthing that, it's the western edge. I've got my western edge of Jefferson Parkway, but it's eastern edge of Rocky Flats.
West of Indiana. Right?
Yes,
West of
Indiana, correct.
That corridor right contiguous to Indiana, the barbed wire fences and all that kind of stuff. There are a lot of implications of unearthing that on this town as far as I'm concerned. And that is, then flows into the Rocky Mountain Greenway. The pathway that I believe is going to happen of the Rocky Mountain Greenway crossing over Rocky Flats is the most extreme disruption that you could ever imagine. So you've got Rocky Flats. It was going to cross over this corner up here. That's where the Rocky Mountain Greenway was going to connect. Now the Rocky Mountain Greenway is connecting at midpoint, which we have studies done by the Atomic Energy Commission of how dirty that is, how contaminated that is. They're going across, they're going down, they're going this way, and they're going way up. And so it's a huge amount of disruption on Rocky Flats for this current Greenway proposal. As I understand it, remember when we voted not to participate, that group of 6 that was left with the conditional approval put out an RFP to get a consultant that would put together the testing plan. And my understanding, I have not seen it yet, is that that award has been made to a company that will be putting forth the testing plan. When that testing plan comes forth, there's going to be a lot of public hearings. And so I think this town is going to have to be very alert to that and then be prepared to attend those public meetings and perhaps submit written comment on that as well. So 2018 is a really critical year for both JP and Rocky Flats issues.
I think this is continuing areas of importance to the town of Superior and our residents. I don't see it as a priority of what we want to get done. I see it more of a, let's decide collectively what our position is on Jefferson Parkway and Rocky Mountain Greenway and have that available at any point in time, and also go to the meetings and present that position. Because what we're perceived as now is that Superior is absolutely against and will do anything at all costs to stop the Jefferson Parkway. I don't think that's our position. Our position is we have concerns about that they want to take off space out of the Rocky Mountain Regional Airport, which is a safety area, and that would definitely impact residents of Superior because we're adjacent. We're the only community adjacent to residents. The only residents are adjacent to, well, I take that back. Now there's apartments there. Yeah, right. There weren't before, but there are apartments there now. But we have residents right adjacent to the Rocky Mountain Regional Airport, and we want that to be as safe as possible, and the traffic that comes off of there. And I think we need a position that says we're not in favor at all of Jefferson Parkway taking part of the safety area of Rocky Mountain Regional Airport. And I think we should state that so we know what our position is, whenever you get asked or any of us get asked. And then same way with Rocky Flats. It's never been our desire to have any part of Rocky Flats dug out for a road. And then the other thing is that we believe, if we believe, that there will be increased traffic through Superior because of the Jefferson Parkway, then we need to state that we have concerns there's going to be increased traffic. So those are the three things, and maybe there's more, that I think we should put in a position paper. And then participate, as Sandy said, be aware of everything that's going on, go to the meetings, present our position, and continue to stay active in that. But just saying it's a priority, I think of it as a priority as being we're going to work against or for something, but this is our position. We're not in favor of taking away the airport, we're not in favor of taking away Rocky Flats, we're not in favor of increasing our traffic and whatever else is there. Same way with the Rocky Mountain Greenway, I think we need to state our position that we would rather have that Greenway positioned on our property on the north side of Highway 128, up Bloomfield and on this side.
An alternate route. It's very easily doable, an alternate route.
Well, there you go. There's a position.
Because it's an 80-mile greenway.
Right.
That our tax dollars are paying for. It is unnecessary for it to go through Rocky Flats in any way, shape, or form.
But the Fish and Wildlife are adamant because they want to be able to show value to their trails that they're going to build on that.
But to do a route around is very easy because they're probably going to create that overpass on Indiana.
Right.
And I've talked to them informally because I'm always in places where they're, and I said, are you going to have an off-ramp there?
Yeah.
And they want to have an off-ramp anyway, because people may not want to do the whole 80-mile thing, right? So they periodically have to have off-ramps. And I said, great, make it non-ramp, ramp and off-ramp. Mm-hmm. Because then our people can come up McCaslin, right, and get on the Greenway, right? They don't have to go through Rocky Flats to get on the Greenway.
Right. Well, what I'm saying though here is for today's purposes, I don't see it as one of our 6 priorities that we've come up with so far, but it's really, we need to create a position document, I believe, that we all collectively agree on and have available to us whenever there's a discussion about this.
And we have to allocate staff time. I'm fine not making, go ahead.
But to Sandy's point, I agree. It's not necessarily a priority, like we want to attract the businesses to the town and we want to build a civic space and things like that. However, to Sandy's point, there are some critical deadlines that are happening this year that we just need. Same thing with like the broadband issue, that there are these critical kind of decision points that are going to be reached. So we need to make sure that we're, they're top of mind, and that if we're going to be submitting a position statement, and I agree, I think that a position statement on the town makes a whole lot of sense.
It wouldn't be hard to create.
Yeah, you can sign me up right now that any disturbing of soils on Rocky Flats is an absolute non-starter. It's a terrible idea. I've said before that we should have signs as you're leaving the town with the skull and crossbones that you're entering a Superfund site at your own peril.
Yeah, we got to be a little careful here, guys. We're using Rocky Flats, and I want the whole thing walled off, but we're using Rocky Flats and the
wall.
Right.
Wall.
Right, but we're using Rocky Flats and the buffer zone and the wildlife protection area, whatever the buffer zone around Rocky Flats, the refuge. We're using those terms interchangeably, so we need to be a little careful there.
Yeah, but if you look at like the contamination maps,
I understand.
They are.
I'm with you entirely. Having talked to people, there are a lot of folks that are losing some credibility because they are not. I'd like to differentiate ourselves from others, and I think we have, and I'd like to continue to do that, and we need to be very careful with our words. And
I don't disagree with that, but to me, this is a public health problem, and I don't want construction on that property. If you look at the contamination maps, they're well within the wildlife refuge. They're not just limited to the main operating area there.
Right.
And I don't want anybody,
Well,
anybody breathing particulates
guys,
that
here's
are.
where it comes home. Why do we even care? Supposedly we're upwind. Yeah, until the winds are circular, et cetera, et cetera. The amount of dust that is produced. Rita, you were driving with me when we went through Candelas with all the bulldozers and whatnot, big windy day, and I joked, you gotta have a car wash before I pull my car into my garage. I'm not
We
really
held our
joking.
breath.
Because the fact is, that dust travels on your car and your tires and your bike tires and your shoes and whatnot into your house. Well, I don't have little grandchildren or little children that are crawling on the carpet but this happens. And the fact is, there's going to be a huge amount of dust worked up if this goes forth, and our residents at a minimum need to know that it's happening and to take precautions. And you don't want to unnecessarily raise the specter, but you also want your population to be safe. I've said numerous times, and I will say again, the charge of an elected official, I think, is in my opinion, first and foremost, to do whatever you can to assure public safety. And if that's a nasty intersection, that's it. If it's potential airplane crash over your area because of weird traffic patterns, that's it. But if it's also spreading of contaminants and exposing a population, if all we end up being able to do in this is to educate our residents
Right.
to take an alternate route when construction's taking place, to stay the heck off Rocky Flats and enjoy the other 1,000 acres of recreational trails that aren't on Rocky Flats, then the educational thing, so be it. I don't know what form all this is going to take yet, but we need to be aware and we need to be responsive. So I put it on the list of my top 2018 priorities because I think it's that important. But like broadband, if it only, it takes a different route, but we are going to be proactive and agree to be proactive, I can live with that too.
Right, just like we are on all the public safety and
Right.
transportation issues. Right.
Okay.
But
I do like
certain-
the idea of the position statement, though.
I think we should do that, because I got that every time I saw the guy who just retired from Jefferson County.
Rozier.
Yeah, Rozier. He was so angry and argumentative whenever he saw any of us, because he said, "You people," and we were so against. So I said, "We're not against it. We're against where you're putting it." So a position paper would be good, and then we continue to do that. But what's so amazing is that you sit there at these meetings, and federal government agency people will say it's safe. And then others will say, our government said it's safe, so we should all accept that. And that's where we're at. We have this.
Did you go to the Pentagon Papers movie? The Post, go and
Yeah.
then say that.
Yeah, I know. Okay, we're done, right?
All right, we're done with this.
Oh,
All right.
good, excellent.
Yeah, we're done with priorities, so we got a good,
So Matt, will you circulate a
Yeah.
revised document for everybody?
I wrote down
Okay.
5, but I don't know if I'm right.
I think that's correct.
Okay, all right.
All right, we've got about 50 minutes left for 2 more items. Doesn't mean we have to take 50 minutes.
Oh, you're
That
so
is-
sweet.
Was that a note of encouragement? Try
That
not
is
to
a note of
do-
encouragement. I think we can roughly split these time-wise, so that's kind of what I'm going to be aiming for here. Let's take smoking regulations, because that's kind of next on our list here. This is a topic that we talked about last year. An ordinance was brought forth, but no action was taken on that ordinance, and there was a request for some further discussion on it, so that's where we are.
So I've
Where did the request come from? Who submitted this request?
So I've been contacted by residents. I didn't actually suggest that it come up on this agenda, but I talked about it with Kendra originally, because my recollection of the discussion was that we had tabled the discussion, and we didn't decide that we weren't going to do it, that we had a problem with the ordinance as drafted, so I was wondering what the status was on the tabling, and if it was tabled indefinitely, or if we were going to see something redrafted. So then that was kind of the last I heard about it. So, that said, I've talked to a number of residents who, they've got concerns about secondhand smoke for kids breathing it in parks, concern about fire danger in open space areas. We had issues with the ordinance because it was kind of drafted in a way that was vague and ambiguous. There was issues related to the vaping issue, but then there was also kind of punitive measures that Sandy was concerned about. Generally speaking, I'd be in favor of a simple, straightforward ordinance that just dealt with smoking, that prohibited it in our parks and in our open space areas. For the public health concerns related to secondhand smoke, for kids playing in playgrounds, they shouldn't be breathing in cigarettes smoke. And then for the fire danger, we had that grass fire up near 128th last summer. We live in a dry area, so banning it in the open space areas as well, I think would be a prudent step.
This is painful. This ordinance just drives me nuts because it is, for example, smoke or smoking means the burning of a lighted cigarette, cigar, pipe, or what. Doesn't it mean the inhalation? If we're really talking about health risk, lighting one is not the problem, smoking it, inhaling is. So when you go, I started reading through this and I just got so annoyed. It is carelessly constructed.
Well, this is the old one. This isn't a new one. This is the old one.
I just provided you
As a
all
So the
background.
discussion is just a general concept
Okay.
of, are you in favor of?
Yeah, we don't have to go through the ordinance.
Don't think
Yeah.
about the ordinance as drafted. I'm in favor of scrapping that ordinance altogether,
Okay,
and let's just
so,
have
yeah.
a discussion about
Yeah.
whether or not we're supportive of the idea or not. If we are, good, then let's start over.
Say what your idea is, again.
No smoking in parks, no smoking in open space areas.
Smoking or vaping or anything like that.
No, he's
No,
just saying
smoking.
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 So that includes you can't smoke walking on a trail.
Correct.
What about on a sidewalk?
That's
No.
not a park or open space area.
So a concrete sidewalk that walks through an open space, you can or cannot.
So somebody walks their dog smoking a cigarette through Purple Park.
Can't do that.
What about if they're walking,
Along McCaslin,
in-
along Colton.
like if you're going up off one of the concrete trails?
If you're on
off
a
Rock
city,
Creek Circle?
if you're on a city right away, right, and you're on
You
town right
cannot.
away.
So that means on any city sidewalk adjoining a street?
You can.
You
No,
can.
you're saying you're not.
say-
No, I'm
that-
saying that you're not on a park, you're not on open space land, you're on a city right away, you're on the sidewalks.
So you could smoke
So,
there.
yeah, I mean, so unless our ordinance already deals with that, I don't think it does.
Well,
I think-
public
I think-
spaces, we do have some.
That's
Yeah.
more
So
for
you're
like
saying you
patios.
could smoke if you were
And
walking
I'm not saying-
outside?
I'm
No,
not-
I'm just
yeah.
wanting an understanding of what you're, so if you were walking from Rock
I-
Creek Circle up toward Snowmasters on one of those internal trails, it's not in a park, but it's in
So I
open
don't know
space.
what the scope of the current ban, I know it talks about public buildings and things like that, I don't know if it deals
Outdoor
with sidewalks.
restaurants and that, yeah.
I'm not suggesting we make any modifications to what's already on the books, in terms of changing anything related to sidewalks or anything. If you're allowed to smoke on sidewalks today, you should be allowed to smoke on sidewalks tomorrow. This regulation would only apply to parks and open space lanes. And if there's a
Which
path
means
that
you would not be able to, the open space sidewalk that I'm talking about, you would not be able to.
So
smoke on.
I personally don't, I mean, I've never heard anybody complain about this, so, but if you're getting complaints, I'll, take your word for it. But I get that there should, if anybody is dumb enough to go to a playground bench and sit there with a cigarette while their child or grandchild is playing in the playground, they should not be doing that. But should we regulate that by creating an ordinance? I don't know, but clearly it is poor decision-making, but I've personally never seen it. But if it is occurring, and if at least one resident is complaining about that, I suppose we could add an ordinance so there's no ambiguity that you should not be at a playground smoking a traditional cigarette, there's a word for it, because secondhand smoke is bad. But it does feel to me, I used the word nanny state last year, I'm not a huge fan of creating ordinances that we cannot enforce, because we don't have any intent to enforce any of these things, suggesting that smoking is banned in the public space of the town of Superior. Because again, I just don't, we just spent 3 hours on priorities, and I didn't hear this as a priority. I've never heard it. And the idea that Matt and Kendra are gonna spend time on writing an ordinance instead of arm wrestling ranch capital doesn't thrill me. But if we could keep it simple, if it's truly a problem, and we keep it simple to playgrounds, which would be inexcusable if somebody's smoking at a playground, then I'm all for it. But if you want to do something broader, to include vaping, sidewalks, parks, which are not always playgrounds, then that feels like a little overreaching to me. But not against, I abhor smoking. I don't smoke, I don't like it, kills people. Don't like it.
And
I just
where
don't
a previous
regulate it.
thing fell apart was minors who possessed in any way.
Yeah.
They didn't have to be smoking, but if some policeman saw them in a park, let's say, and they had a pack in their shirt pocket, well,
But it's
they
already
possessed
prohibited. It's
it.
already prohibited.
Yeah, so.
Come on.
Yeah, it's
I'm
illegal
like,
for a
I
minor
did
to have them
not
anyway.
see any need to pull kids into the legal system for such things. They already face an uphill challenge with all the ways in which they enter the legal system these days. So I'm really disinclined to waste any time on this one unless Matt or staff can identify contiguous towns that have something cut and dried and easy and, easily understood by the public. Because I think where Sandy was going was, oh, so you're walking on the sidewalk, but it happens to intersect a concrete path that's called a trail. All of a sudden, you're in violation when you didn't used to be, when you were still walking along Colton Road. So,
I think you could
Easy.
easily say extend the no smoking to playgrounds and pavilions.
Yes.
Done,
I would support playgrounds and pavilions.
done.
Yeah, I'd support that too.
playgrounds, pavilions, and then you might want to add sports stands, sports,
Well, if we said
Fields?
athletic fields.
athletic fields.
Yeah, or you could do that, but playgrounds and pavilions, done. Because what the sheriff deputy said is that a lot of teenagers will be smoking on playground equipment or under a pavilion, and they can't tell if they're smoking cigarettes or marijuana or what, but each of which is illegal for teenagers. And this would help them to be able to at least tell them, get out of here, stop it, you can't be there, and then they'd go out to find
We've heard
a
a substantial problem is the turf, synthetic turf, where anybody smokes on it, drops the cigarette, and you burn through the expensive turf. So if we're not expressly making that illegal, we should make that illegal too.
If, that's pretty
See
defined,
where
a
you start at.
field, right? An athletic field in the town athletic, whether it's a
Yeah.
baseball or the Williams Field or whatever. I think that would
Tennis
be
court.
one, yeah, tennis, yeah, you just can't smoke on those public
Pools.
spaces, huh?
In the pool?
In the pool.
Matt, how do you feel about this one? Matt Magley?
I think the more specific you can be, which is the direction you're going, the better off we'll be, and the easier it will be to
In your opinion,
enforce.
should we bother?
I think this would be something simple that we could do.
And Boulder County, I think, just did this for all their open space.
I found it in
Well,
the city of Boulder.
did.
Was it the city? But I think
The
the
city of
county
Boulder
did
banned
too,
it,
didn't it?
Which
But-
is obviously,
That's
Yeah, well, that's
Boulder.
very obvious.
It's Boulder.
But I think, I don't like to see someone like you were saying, and I've seen this happen, in the playground, they're sitting on the bench where the kids are playing and they're smoking. Or I see a bunch of teenagers hanging on the playground and they're smoking. So if we can be specific and just add that's public spaces, playgrounds, pavilions, and athletic fields.
Yeah, because I wouldn't ban it from the trails. I think that's the bigger piece for me is, I don't want somebody not to be able to walk on the trail.
bad enough they're smoking.
Yeah.
It's-
Does that
But-
fit
but
the
at least
market?
they're
Do you think
moving
that
when
they're
they're
I mean, I
smoking.
think it's a step in the right direction.
All right.
I don't think it's going to fully address the concerns that were raised by the residents that I heard from, but
Yeah,
And I've
it's something's better than nothing.
right.
Well, and it's an issue of enforcement versus trying to solve a problem. And I think we can enforce it to a point at parks, playgrounds, and
Pavilions.
pools and pavilions.
Okay.
Well, the
A
pools-
trail would be,
Well, part
if we were going to do our trails.
Part of the
it would be impossible.
enforcement, comes, this isn't a question of having the sheriffs out there writing additional tickets. This is equipping the residents with a means to point to a sign at a playground and say, hey, listen, this ordinance says you can't smoke here.
Yeah.
And the same thing goes for we have open space lands and trails that, right in your backyard, right? And people could be walking on that trail right there and smoking a cigarette, and you could say, hey, listen, I can breathe that in my backyard, and you can't do that under town code. And people may not know that.
Right.
And it's citizen enforcement by just saying, I'd appreciate it if you didn't.
But
I
would
think
not-
that the
I wouldn't do
enforcing it
on those
along the
trails.
tract H
I
trail,
understand.
Yeah, okay.
like enforcing it along tract H trail, like what you're talking about, it's almost impossible. Because right now, I'm concerned
Yeah.
about all the dogs that are out running everywhere out there without anybody picking up after them. We can't even enforce that, and that's
Yeah.
going to be a
No,
problem.
but that's what he's saying, is you
So the
wouldn't
point
make it
is,
bad.
Yeah.
the point is, then, do we not have something on the books, like dogs,
Mhm.
right? So do you not have something on the books that says you need to pick up after your
Yeah.
pet?
Yeah.
I think most people say no, like we should have something on the books. So at a minimum, we could say, listen, you need to do that.
Well, I want to send all of my guests that smoke out to tract H to smoke from now on, instead of in front of my house, and then they put it in my flowers and stuff, anyway, I think that we can clearly define, and then we don't have a problem with people. I hadn't thought about until you said it, about people walking their dogs and that they might be smoking along the trails. A lot of people will do that, I think. And when I say a lot, I don't know if it's a majority or a small majority or a small minority or whatever. But I think that we can clearly define, and it makes sense to say you can't smoke in the pavilions or in the playgrounds or on athletic fields.
So I think we're in support of that simple ordinance moving forward. I'll only throw out that one of the things that brought this forth last year was vaping and issues that certain residents had around seeing it, breathing it, and so on. And what I'm hearing here is that I'm not hearing any inclusion of that in this. Is that correct, or do you want to, or?
I don't, so.
I don't want to go there yet. I think that, people are still kind of thinking that most people that are reasonable people, if they see a sign that says no smoking, they won't be vape there either.
They probably won't.
Yeah,
Okay.
and so
Okay.
most reasonable people that want to abide by the social norms that exist in the community that they're in will also not vape,
Okay,
I would hope.
all right.
Yeah,
Let's-
because people are now equating that naturally smoking with vaping, and instead of calling it out specifically, because that would take another 3 hours to discuss that.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, anything further on this?
Mm-mm.
Okay. All right, term limits.
So we're directing
We're
staff to come
directing
back with a new,
staff
okay,
with an
all right.
ordinance, yeah. All right, committee term limits. As our packet says, starting back in 2011, there was a lengthy process to reorganize the structure of committees, and which included the creating of term limits. And there's been some questions recently, and I've circulated some emails about my thoughts on term limits, and got feedback from many of you with your thoughts. And it seemed like there was kind of a trend towards perhaps eliminating term limits, but that's why we're discussing it here further.
I can give the historic perspective on this. And the committees we inherited back in the day when I took over were populated with people who didn't change over very often. And it sort of became real conflict point when a vacancy did occur. They basically nominated a person to the board to take over that vacancy, and the board just routinely approved it, right? The board never actually questioned it because it puts the board in a bad position. If in fact you've got committee members and they nominate their neighbor, the board doesn't feel comfortable saying, no, we don't want their neighbor who has a specific name to serve, right? And so it was a real problem. And I have to say that having term limits of some kind has proven to be successful. I mean, we have largely committees that are pretty populated and full and all that kind of stuff, and we have a reasonable amount of turnover, natural anyway. I would totally counsel against getting rid of term limits, the same way I would counsel against getting rid of them for trustees. After a certain period of time, the demographics of the community change. You want a committee whose population, whose members represent all aspects. You don't want all of ProStack to come from one part of town, or OSAC to come from one part of town, or people who are buddies. You want that independent thought process. So I am a strong proponent because I've seen the success of this. Two things I can throw out there. If somebody feels you need to do something with them, we can always extend the terms. We don't have to say 3 years. We just were trying something. 3 years was not magic. It could be 2 4-year terms if in fact you are comfortable with people being there 8 years, the same way you are trustees. And the impetus was on us as a town to have these monthly or quarterly recruitment things so that we had people in the queue who would take over the vacancy. And that's where we haven't done a good job as far as I'm concerned. And maybe we're going about it the wrong way. What we had hoped to do is create interest among an additional 2 or 3 or 4 people at all times for every committee, and they sort of casually attended the committee meetings, learned whether or not they were interested in pursuing a permanent spot on the committee, et cetera, et cetera. Well, we haven't built that queue. Sometimes we've had 3 or 4 applications for one opening, and when we give it to one, which we have to do, right, we sort of upset the other 2, and they say, no, I'm not interested, because they don't want to be rejected again, right? So there are some tweaks that can happen to creating sort of the longevity, the farm team, if you will. And then somebody recommended to me during, when I was discussing this with them, also allowing the committees to go out and as a committee recruit members to their own committee. And, ProStack could host something, or OSAC could host something, et cetera, to where you recruit. I don't like it being individual members, because that's what happened before, is you got your neighbors, and you got a real small group representing a real small. Anyway, bottom line, it has worked. We've got a specific problem in front of us with the request from Peter and ProStack, and Kendra weighed in. The way that would be remedied is through the provision in, and it doesn't remedy his particular problem, is after a year, anybody can reapply to be on a committee after a year absence, after their 6-year term. They can reapply to be on a committee. Or after Matt, what is it, 3 months? After a certain period in which no other candidates emerge, and a former committee member can be put back on the committee. That's why we put those things in there. But it does allow for turnover if there is active interest in that committee. In the case of ProStack, I love the job Peter has done as chairman. I'm a big proponent of his, but I do believe another person in ProStack would emerge as very competent chairman. I mean, Jim Payne was supremely competent as a chair, and he was term limited. He left, and Peter came in and became a supremely competent chair, in my opinion, and I believe others would emerge as well. So I think term limits solved a problem. We didn't address this out of the blue. There was a problem that had to be addressed, and I just ask you to compare it to your own term limits.
I appreciate the history on it and the challenge that you had at the time. I just think, though, that the board has the ultimate ability to not reappoint someone or deal with these issues from an appointment or
But we never
non-appointment
do.
standpoint.
But we don't, Clint,
Well,
that's
but
the problem.
it's hard to do. I get it. It's hard to do, but I think this is totally separate than elected official term limits. I'm not even suggesting we go there. I think that is absolutely appropriate. We're talking about citizen volunteers that want to come and give their own time to make their community a better place. And I think the idea of saying, no, you can only do that for 6 years, or, take a month off, and if then, all this baloney, I just think that's, if it were me, I'd say, okay, great, I'm done, and I won't come back. With Historical Commission, we've thrown it out the window for that, because that's a limited population that we don't want to exclude them, and so we've made that exception already. I just really think it goes contrary to what we're trying to do, is let people give their time to make the community a better place, and we're restricting their ability to do that.
And we did police at least one member on the planning commission who was not showing up to planning commission meetings.
Well, as chair of the planning commission, I had a couple of phone calls, and I asked them, I said, I need you to step down if you cannot make these meetings. So, I mean, there's mechanisms in place, and they did, by the way, step down.
Yes, so I mean, I'm pretty sure that's how maybe Bob McCool was appointed to the planning commission the second time around. I think there was a vacancy opened up that wasn't mine. It was, I think there was another vacancy, but from somebody not
He was
showing
appointed
up.
to
He was
All
appointed.
right, then there's maybe somebody before. But
So-
anyway, I think that, when you look at, in addition to Peter Bomley, so at the last OSAC meeting, Patricia Dunham raised the issue, because she's coming up on her term limit, and she's the vice chair. And so they're talking about elections for, the next go-around. She wanted to raise the issue, and I told her, I said, we're going to be discussing these term limits, so before you make any sort of commitment, whether to run or not to run for office, just keep in mind that things may change with respect to term limits. My concern is that we've got the problem on OSAC right now. We've got vacancies. We've got vacancies on ProStack. I think we are. If we were in a situation where we actually had more demand than supply, that would be one thing. But right now, we have not enough demand. We've got vacancies, and I think we're
Well,
But
artificially
I'd like to
purging
address
roles.
that.
Yeah.
Part of the problem we've had with the committees is that's an add-on that our Parks and Recreation staff has to deal with on top of all the things they do. We have now committed that our Parks and Recreation staff is going to have a full-time person committed to managing and encouraging participation on our committees. I don't think we're going to have this problem with vacancies, because our new person's going to be actively out there recruiting. So what I would like to suggest is, it ain't broke, people. Let's leave it the way it is. Let's let our new committee coordinator get into place. Give them 6 months if we want to revisit this at the end of 6 months. But it's not broken. Let's leave it the way it is. We're talking about throwing out the baby because we got one little problem here. This has worked. We've had a number of good people be term limited off our committees. They've become involved in our community in other ways. Let's leave it in place. If we decide at the end of a year with our new committee coordinator that we still got this problem and that by wiping out term limits will keep our committees staffed, I don't think that's going to be the issue. But I would like to see us leave it in place because I do believe it's an effective way for us to get new people involved.
So I think there's a difference between, to Sandy's point, I think there's a difference between elected officials and volunteers that are serving on our advisory committees. I don't think that they're one and the same, and I think that there is value in, if we have volunteers who are passionate about, historical commission or the planning commission or ProStack or OSAC or
Mark, the
ACES.
unintended consequence that I'd like you to consider is, as the community perceives that these things don't turn over very often at all, you're going to have less interest and less anything regarding getting on those committees. And that's where they become a self-perpetuating thing of a very sort of inbred group.
So my concern is I think that kind of disparages the group.
Well,
what I would like to say is that there is value in having expertise on these particular issues and having the ability of a group to work together and to formulate ideas and to bring recommendations. And to Clint's point, if there's somebody that we decide that this person's not a good fit anymore, I think that's the way we take care of it. But I think we're just artificially purging the
I'm
roles.
worried about sort of using, nobody's disparaging, these are volunteers, everybody's very appreciative, so nobody's disparaging anybody in any group. I think there's very compelling arguments for both sides, but the downside to having a member, and we're talking about, we don't have that many members on that many committees, and yeah, we're not a huge town, but I think you're talking about, we need committee members that would represent about 1/10% of the total population, of the adult population of the town. I'm pretty sure that we could find 1/10% to participate in the committees. And if we have a problem that people aren't getting on the committees, or the committees aren't evolving enough, because historically we had people that were not moving off the committee, there's plenty of other volunteer opportunities. We're not disparaging those members of the committees. Very compelling arguments on both sides, but the purpose of the retreat was to have a dialogue. I'm not interested in changing it this time. I think we've heard two other people say they're not interested in changing this time. So I think I like the suggestion. Let's, why fix what ain't broke? Let's look at this in 6 months, especially when we have a new staff member, and if his or her advice is, gosh, you're really, the feedback I got from the committee volunteers is that they're discouraging future participants because you got to roll off too quick, then we could look at extending the terms or doing something. But this feels, I personally like, change is hard, but I like change. I like the fact that this board changes periodically. I like the fact that the committees change periodically, and there's plenty of volunteer and leadership opportunities in the town. And so the fact that somebody is, feels like they're pushed out of a job that they really like, you can still participate at that committee you may not be a chair or a committee member anymore, but these are publicly noticed meetings that people can participate in. And as most of us, whether or not we sat on a committee or didn't, learned ways that we could have influence in a community, sometimes outside the committee process. And there are plenty of ways to be a leader and a volunteer in the community. I don't think we should revisit the term limits at this time. But if we in October, November, when we start looking at the structure and the budget, just as we looked at merging those two committees last year, I think that's the time to look at it. But for now, and I'm not disparaging those members. Very appreciative of their volunteer support.
Okay. Any further?
So when is, just for logistics, when is Peter's terms up?
June.
This summer? And the same with Patricia's?
Mm-hmm.
So unless we, and the conversation with respect to Peter, we've got a request from him, and So what are we doing?
We can
We're-
rewrite the rule. We cannot, I will tell you that this was a difficult issue to address for various reasons back in the day, and I can get into them. I'm not really interested to do it right now. We were fully aware that there were areas of that resolution that were not included, but there was no more appetite on the board to finesse some things. And so we can revisit that. We can, like I said, we could always extend terms. We can always add other caveats because it didn't foresee every eventuality. But at the time, some of us raised, well, what about, and people were just tired of it. Matt, I appreciated that timeline you included. It was 6 months of addressing this. And by the end of it, nobody wanted to do the whatabouts or finesse it or whatnot. So I'm not saying it's perfect in any shape or form, but what I have done is witnessed the turnover on these committees, and on net, I think it's been wildly positive in terms of bringing new thought, new energy, new expertise. And because we stagger, we assure that there's always somebody in there with 3 years of expertise. That's more new board members have. When Chris and I are off the board, you new guys will have only served 2 years, right? Luckily, Rita's been around and the mayor's been around for a while. But 3 years of expertise in a committee is not nothing. I mean, it is something.
But so my question is like specifically as to them, are we going to ask them to make a formal request for their terms to be extended? Are we not considering that at this time? What are we doing?
I think we could suggest that. We can say the current rules say that if in whatever period of time nobody is found, you can apply.
I think we're right. Let's
Yeah.
just go and follow our active recruitment process. I don't
Right.
understand why we're.
What is that period, Matt? If we can't fill a position, in what period of time can a former member come?
I'd have to look at all.
Yeah.
I would caution the board about making, if you're going to stick to having term limits in, I would caution the board against making exceptions because you're going to get requests constantly.
Yeah, and then we're going to be right into the situation that you didn't want to get into because you created term limits.
Well, we
So
don't.
it's-
Let's reality. This was adopted in 2012.
Mhm.
In 5 years, we've gotten this request. So it's not like people are asking.
Because now they're getting
things.
term limited out.
Yeah.
I would have been term limited out this year too, so.
So the answer is run for the board.
Right, that's what
No,
it
the
is.
answer isn't run for the
I
board.
just-
We don't even run.
I just want to make a couple comments about it. One is, I don't think we should change term limits just because we can't find somebody to fill a vacancy on a committee. We should need to do the active recruiting. And even though a person is off of the 9 voting members of the committee, doesn't mean they can't participate in the committee.
Yeah, because
And I
Jim
think
Payne
that's
comes
what
to
the-
PROSTAC meetings all the time.
That's the wrong impression that we've left, is that once you're term limited, you're done.
Right.
Don't ever show your face here again. You know, we don't want to see you back at this committee. And I think that's what we need to do. We actually, I think we don't have enough people on committees. I think there should be more members, because you really can't get a lot of work done with a 9-member when only 6 or 5 show up at a meeting, you know, consistently. Not that the others aren't active, but I mean, people are out of town, or, you know, you can't have a full 9-member committee meeting as often as you'd like. And we tried to get 12 plus 12 associates for the CAPS, and we got turned down for that when we presented and I really think a committee should be more people on it, and then you'll also have more turnover just from the fact that you've got more openings available. But I don't think we should fix a open position on a committee by changing a procedure that just got implemented 5 years ago, or basically 6. I think my last comment is that I love the Historical Commission. and, you know, I'm the liaison there, and those people come, and that's just really important to them. And there's other people that come and go that are members, but the ones that kind of can consistently be
But you understand, those new members would never have been on Historical Commission save for this rule change, the new ones.
Historical Commission,
Yeah.
there are no term limits.
Well, wrong.
I don't think I'm wrong with that, am
We've
I?
accepted that, but did we ever put that through?
No, that's-
There's a
amendment?
provision in there that allows the board to reappoint them.
Yeah, there's no limitation.
But the
Yeah,
new-
because they're a commission and not a committee, and that's why there was a different wording of that. But I think that if someone is really interested in only one area of a committee, like parks or cultural arts or open space, trails, and that's what they want to focus the next 10 years of their life on, well, they can do it as a committee member, a voting committee member for 6 years, and then they'll have to do it as a associate member of the committee after that. And I think we need to be more upfront about that. We should encourage people to come to the committee meetings, even if you're not a voting member at the table.
But what I want to make clear on Historical Commission, because it's being used as an exception, and I'm going to have to meet with Matt on one thing before I say it. What I can say is the old parameters of Historical Commission allowed them to select their new members. And this changed that. The board has put on I believe it's the 3 that, I can't remember their names.
Well, I mean, the resolution says they
Bound.
have to follow the same,
Right, we may.
as
yeah.
everybody else know. Maybe there was another time where something was voted in, but the resolution says they have to follow
Yeah.
the same
So that's
section
what-
in the municipal code.
I'll
that
check about
everybody
that
else
with Matt,
does.
and we can bring that up
Well,
later.
they're not term limited.
But the other thing was
I'm
they
just
had,
reading
they
what the
had their own
resolution says.
I think that's
requirements
changed.
that any new member, potential new member had to attend a year.
What's the
Wasn't it a
date?
year or was it 2
Well,
years,
it's the
Matt,
actual
of Historical Commission meetings before they would be considered for
23rd of April,
membership?
2012.
We got rid of that because this all became very limiting and was sort of a closed door to new members, besides the ones that were on there. So we changed some things regarding that as part of this process.
Well, they have to submit themselves to be a candidate, there's no question about that. But anyway, I think that what we've decided today is a good discussion, and I would like us to encourage people to attend committees if they're interested in that particular committee. They do not have to be a voting member in order to participate.
And I do believe when we get our new person, we'll see more robust recruitment and just engagement with our committees and maybe even new ways to get them involved.
Right.
I hope.
Yeah,
I hope too.
yeah, that'd be good. Okay.
Okay,
Good
anything
retreat.
further?
I just have one question about the public art and the roundabout. Is there any ETA on when that will come before the board?
Second meeting in February.
Second meeting in February? Okay.
Speaking of that, I was at the Metro Mayor's Retreat on this past Saturday, and the mayor of Greenwood Village handed out these really nice color booklets of all the public art in their town.
Oh.
And I brought a couple of them, I'll bring them to the next board meeting.
Oh, that's great.
I don't know if we'd want to go quite that elaborate, but it's really neat. It just has one picture and then a little description of who did it, what date it was installed.
We did all that. That's available, so.
Okay.
But not in a pretty booklet like probably with the,
Yeah, but.
because they
I'll
have a lot of
mention that
money
to
there.
CAPS.
But
Another
I
thing.
think, that was my point, is
Yeah.
that I think CAPS would enjoy seeing this and could perhaps catalog all of the art
You're,
in town. For
they did,
public consumption.
and of course, the chair is a graphic design person, so
Yes.
and I'll just mention it to her, and I bet she will just produce that.
I think something in a digital form would be fine. I
Right.
don't know, but maybe printing.
Hey,
you know,
Matt, a
since-
question for you.
Yeah.
Did the chair of CAPS call you regarding Bill Jenks' visit next week to town?
Daryl sent me an email.
Does that work?
I told her she could reach out to him and see, and then to let me know so I could let the board know.
Right. So, just so everybody's informed.
But she didn't say what the subject matter was.
Bill's here for the town board meeting, and oh, by the way, a CAPS meeting is on Thursday, right? So the chair of CAPS would like to have Bill come to the CAPS meeting on Thursday just for a refresher on where are you, whatever. If Bill cannot meet, isn't in town that long, you know, if he's going home sooner, she has recommended that CAPS actually have a meeting, a coffee with him Tuesday morning or whenever he could make, just to continue that dialogue. So I have no idea what form that might take, but Matt will be sure get it out there publicly.
That way, if
and when it happens.
anybody wanted to attend, they could.
I sent out that information about the residents of Louisville concerned about the bright lights coming through the parking structure, which I was surprised about. I don't usually come all the way down 36, but I did Wednesday night at 10:45.
I have got an email to send to the board on that.
And then I was going to, is that an appropriate discussion item with Bill? Even though that's not
It's not his
his project? Yeah, well, he's sometimes stood up for and acted on behalf, spoke on behalf of the.
I've got an email that's ready to
Okay,
go out. So.
all right.
Okay, anything further? All right, we're done.
Thank you.
Patrick?
Hey, Mark, can I get you to help me with this Dropbox?